Good morning. Today is July 9th, 2020. It is 9:03 a.m. This is the duly called video meeting of the Texas Low-Level Radioactive Waste Disposal Compact. My name is Brandon Hurley. I'm the chairman. Very quickly, before we get started today, obviously we are meeting via remote means, and this is due to Governor Abbott's March 13th, 2020 proclamation of a state of disaster affecting all counties in Texas due to the COVID-19 virus, and the governor's March 16th, 2020 suspension of certain provisions of the Texas Open Meetings Act. We are authorized to hold this meeting via webinar via Texas Government Code 551.127. Members of the public, if you are watching, you have access, but you will be muted until recognized just for administrative purposes. So at the bottom of your screen, you will see an opportunity, or I believe it's at the bottom of your screen, you have the opportunity to raise your hand during public participation. If you'd like to speak, please click on that raise your hand and I will recognize you and unmute your line so you can speak. An electronic copy of our agenda is available at our website, www.TLLRWDCC.org. If we have any technical problems during today's meeting, we will stop, get those fixed, and then come back, and I will let you all know if a technical problem arises. Very quickly, we will call the meeting to order and do a roll call. I see on my screen Vice Chairman Salzman, Commissioner Edwards, Commissioner Morris, Commissioner Bradford, and Commissioner Mundy. Before we go any further, we would be very remiss if we didn't once again thank Andrew for setting all this up. We would not be having a meeting today without him. Obviously, his technical skills have been absolutely invaluable over the last 3 months, and we appreciate all the efforts he has made. And if anything goes wrong today, it's his fault. So with that, we will move on, and let me ask the public audience: are there any elected officials or other agency officials with us today?
I think Commissioner Janeka from TCEQ was going to attend. I spoke with him yesterday, and he indicated he was going to be on.
Well, thanks to all of you who are attending. Again, if any of you want to speak, please indicate so by hitting the raise hand function on Zoom. Do we have any press with us today? If you would identify yourself. Again, hearing none, we will move on. We are now to item 4 in our agenda, and you'll notice that I'm blazing through the agenda. We have a rather long one today, so I'm going to try to move through as quickly as possible so we can hopefully be done before lunch. But we are now to item 4, which is the public comment section of our agenda. There are traditionally speaker cards that we ask to fill out, but because of the unique system we have going on here, we are going to obviously just give anyone the opportunity to raise their hand. I was just told Travis Bubinik is joined us. He is with the Courthouse News Service. Thank you for joining us, Travis. Also, I just received notice that Ashley Forbes from TCEQ is with us. Thank you, Ashley, for joining us. So at this point, if there's anyone in the public who would like to comment on any matters of a general nature, we will give you that opportunity now. Again, just hit the raise your hand function.
There's a raised hand by Tony Lashinsky.
For some reason, I'm not seeing that. I'm sorry. Hold on. Andrew, I might be doing something wrong.
I also see the hand up for Tony Lashinsky in your right menu of listeners. Do you see the panelists and the attendees?
Yes.
In the attendees, do you see a hand up with a 1 next to it?
hold on. For some reason, I do not see. Oh, there's the attendees. I'm sorry.
You might be on the panelists.
Here we go.
Notes.
I'm sorry, Tony. My technical skills are a little lacking, but I've unmuted your line. And if you'd like to make a public comment at this point, we were all ears.
Nothing in particular. I'm Tony Lashinsky. I'm the Vermont State Nuclear Engineer, and I just wanted to let folks know I'm here monitoring the meeting. I'm mostly listening for some of the agenda items towards the end of the meeting. So,
thank you very much, Tony. We are happy to have you. We would appreciate it if you'd send some of your weather our way.
I work for the state of Vermont. I live in Connecticut, however, and so I'm actually, since we're under a work from home order, I'm actually in my house in northern Connecticut. It's kind of, well, it's kind of warm and humid here. So,
well, join the club. As John Salzman said, I believe it's going to be 100 degrees and humid here today. So Connecticut and Vermont sound pretty good. We appreciate you joining us, Tony. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other public comments of a general nature? Okay, then we will move on at this point to item 5 in our agenda. Andrew, I just got a text from Judge Dolgener asking for the information again for Zoom. Could you reach out to him via email?
I will, no problem.
Text? Thank you. We will move on then to item 5, which is our consideration and possible action on applications for the importation of low-level waste. Commissioners, this is tab 9 in your electronic notebook that was sent to you, and we have several of these today, so we will try to give Vice Chairman Salzman a break whenever he needs it. But the first one is item 5A, which is the import application of RAM services. I'll turn it over to John.
Mr. Chairman, the technical committee has received and reviewed an import permit application from RAM Services Incorporated that was received April 15, 2020. It's number 1-0251-00. In this case, RAM Services, a broker who is a licensed waste processor and collector, requesting authorization to dispose of waste in accordance with the Act. They have specifically requested authorization for Class A, Class B, and Class C stable sealed sources and industrial devices in concrete. And those waste streams were approved for disposal at the site in letter correspondence from TCEQ dated April 23, 2020. They have specifically requested authorization for 45 cubic feet and 96 curies of radioactivity. They have indicated that the waste will originate from all compacts excluding the Northwest Compact and including Michigan, Nebraska, New York, New Hampshire, Maine, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, North Carolina, and Washington, D.C. And I would note that any waste that would originate from the Southwest and the Rocky Mountain Compacts will require export authorization. And to date, the applicant has not provided generator authorizations or export authorizations. In addition, the applicant has requested an agreement that would begin September 1, 2020 with the termination date of August 31, 2021. So this is obviously for next fiscal year. They've also indicated that the waste is from small quantity generators, and based on the volume, curies, and description, I think the commission would concur with that. The technical committee recommends approval, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for the technical committee on the import application of RAM services? John, I have a general question. Is there a reason we had such a high number of applications for this meeting?
I suspect it's because everybody's getting ready for next fiscal year.
Okay.
You know, we had a few the last meeting. There was I want to say one for next year. And I think this is just the onslaught of everybody getting ready for next year.
These are just mostly the brokers, kind of with their annual shopping license coming to us.
Well, some of these are brokers. There are several that are from actual generators as well,
Okay.
but definitely a few from brokers.
Okay.
Before we move on, I'll also note that the judge has joined us. Thanks for joining, Judge. I'll also note that I previously forgot to acknowledge Chris Schneidmiller from the Exchange Monitor, another industry publication, has joined us from the press. Any other questions for the Vice Chairman on the import application of RAM services? Hearing none, we'll move on to a motion.
I make a motion that we approve the import application from RAM Services Incorporated number 1-0251-00. The waste class is Class A, Class B, and Class C. The waste form is stable. The waste description is sealed sources and industrial devices in concrete. The volume is 45 cubic feet. The radioactivity is 96 curies. The waste will originate from all compacts excluding the Northwest Compact and including Michigan, Nebraska, New York, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Maine, North Carolina, and Washington, D.C. The applicant will be required to provide generator authorizations and export authorizations in future correspondence before they can make any shipments. The agreement would begin September 1, 2020 and terminate August 31, 2021. And this would be part of our small quantity generator set aside.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? John, I know we should all know this by now, but would you just give us the 30-second recap on what a small quantity generator set aside is?
A number of years ago, the commission recognized that the facility was serving a vital purpose for basically 37 or 38 states that did not have access to another disposal site. And in particular, a number of radioactive material users around the country are very small, and they don't really have the wherewithal to submit a direct application. So the commission determined that to help ensure both safety and, you could argue, national security, the commission determined that it was really best to set aside some waste volume and curies to ensure that these small generators would always have access to dispose of those sources. So we came up with 2 years ago, I think we finally put this into a rule with definitions, but we believe that it's best practice to ensure that sources, when they are no longer needed, are disposed of. We wanted to ensure that those small generators always had access to the site.
Thank you for that. Any other discussion about the motion currently pending? Any public comment about the motion on item 5A? Seeing no hands raised, we will then move on to a vote. All in favor of the motion to approve the import application of RAM services listed in item 5A in our agenda, please indicate so by saying aye.
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 All opposed, no. Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you very much. Now on to item 5B, the import application of Arizona Public Service, which, Commissioners, is tab 10 in your electronic notebook.
The technical committee has received and reviewed an import application from Arizona Public Service Palo Verde Nuclear Generating Station. It was May 7th, 2020. It's number 1-0252-00. In this case, Palo Verde is a generator requesting authorization to dispose of waste in accordance with the Act. They have specifically requested authorization for Class A, Class B, and Class C unstable ion exchange resin, cartridge filters, and dry active waste, and those waste streams were approved for disposal at the site in letter correspondence from TCEQ dated June 29, 2020. They've requested authorization for 2,000 cubic feet and 600 curies of radioactivity. That waste will be coming from Arizona, which is part of the Southwestern Compact and will require export authorization, which we may or may not have received that, but we would check that. They have requested an agreement that would actually, in this case, the application came through, did not actually specify a disposal year, at least not that I could find. So I think it's safe to assume that they wanted to do this for the upcoming fiscal year. So the agreement would terminate August 31, 2021. The technical committee recommends approval, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for the technical committee on the import application of Arizona Public Service?
John, I have a question, and this is one that'll go across a few of the others where it says some of it is unsealed. And I know there's a later one where it says unsealed. This one says, is it solely sealed? No. How is that transported, or is there a risk during transport for unsealed material?
When they're referring to unsealed, they're talking about a source of sealed sources are double encapsulated. Unsealed radioactive material would be, in fact, paper, plastic, trash, things like that. However, that's just the form of the material. When it's transported, it is always in sealed containers. That's required by DOE.
That's all I was looking for. I wanted to hear confirmation of that. Thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions for the Vice Chairman on item 5B? Hearing none, we'll move on to a motion.
I make a motion that we approve the import application from Arizona Public Service Palo Verde Nuclear Generating Station number 1-0252-00. The waste class is Class A, Class B, and Class C. The waste form is unstable. The waste description is ion exchange resin, cartridge filters, and dry active waste. The volume is 2,000 cubic feet. The total radioactivity is 600 curies. The waste will originate from Arizona, which is part of the Southwestern Compact, so an export authorization will be required. And the agreement would be for next fiscal year with a termination date of August 31, 2021.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion about the import application of Arizona Public Service? Andrew, I noticed we just lost the judge. I'm not sure if that was a technical problem or not.
Yeah, the judge is having difficulty getting audio. He can get video, but he's having trouble getting audio. So he and I are working that issue right now.
He's already back. Any further discussion about the motion to approve the import application of Arizona Public Service represented by item 6B? Any public comment on item 6B? Seeing none, we will move on to a vote. All in favor of the motion to approve the import application of Arizona Public Service represented in item 6B on our agenda, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. All
Brendan,
opposed,
can you hear me?
yes, I can. Can you hear us?
Yeah, now I can. Hang on just a second. How about now?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, I'm with you now.
Hi,
Okay.
Judge.
I'm going to abstain from that vote because I didn't hear it all.
Okay. We will note that for the record. Then please indicate the chair voting in the affirmative as well. And with that, the motion passes. We will now move on to item 5C, which is the import application of Florida Power and Light, which is tab 11 in your electronic notebooks. And I'll turn it back over to the Vice Chairman.
The technical committee has received and reviewed an import application from Florida Power and Light Plant St. Lucie. That was received June 1, 2020. It's number 1-0253-00. St. Lucie is a generator requesting authorization to dispose of waste in accordance with the Act. They've requested authorization for Class A, Class B, and Class C stable and unstable DAW, depleted resins and filters, and sealed sources. Those waste streams were approved for disposal at the site via letter correspondence from TCEQ dated June 29, 2020. And St. Lucie is requesting authorization for 10,000 cubic feet and a total radioactivity of 300 curies. The waste will originate from the state of Florida, which is part of the Southeast Compact and does not require export authorization. And again, the application came through without a specific disposal year indicated. So for purposes of review and the motion, I think it's safe to assume that they are requesting authorization for next fiscal year, so that agreement would terminate August 31 of 2021. The technical committee recommends approval, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for the technical committee on item 5C, the import application of Florida Power and Light? And if for any reason we are wrong about these presumed dates for the coverage of the agreement, if the generators would just let us know, I think that's a clerical issue that we can change when we draft the agreement.
Is there
Mary?
something wrong with our form that it, I mean, did somebody miss filling out a?
I think it's the people that are filling it out are not putting anything in that field because some of them came through and had the dates. So I think it's a matter of sometimes they don't put anything in.
Any further questions for the technical committee on item 5C? Hearing none, we'll move on to a motion.
I make a motion we approve the import application from Florida Power and Light Plant St. Lucie, number 1-0253-00. Waste class is Class A, Class B, and Class C. The waste form is stable and unstable. The waste stream is DAW, depleted resins and filters, and sealed sources. The volume is 10,000 cubic feet. The total radioactivity is 300 curies. The waste will originate from the state of Florida. And the agreement would be for next fiscal year with the termination date of August 31, 2021.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion about the import application of Florida Power and Light? Any public comment on item 5C? Hearing none, we'll move on to a vote. All in favor of the motion to approve the import application of Florida Power and Light represented in item 5C on our agenda, please indicate so by saying aye.
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 All opposed, no. Motion passes. We can now move on to item 5D, the import application of PG&E Diablo Canyon, which is tab 12 in your electronic notebooks, commissioners, and we will turn it back over to the technical committee.
The technical committee has received and reviewed an import application from Pacific Gas and Electric Company Diablo Canyon Power Plant. It was received June 1, 2020. It's number 1-0254-00. Diablo Canyon is a generator requesting authorization to dispose of waste in accordance with the Act. They've requested authorization for Class A, Class B, and Class C stable and unstable polymer solidified resins, cement encapsulated filters, and dewatered resin. And those waste streams were approved for disposal at the site in a letter correspondence from TCEQ dated June 29, 2020. They've requested authorization for 550 cubic feet and 335 curies. The waste will originate from the state of California, which is part of the Southwestern Compact and does require export authorization. And they've requested an agreement for next fiscal year with the termination date of August 31, 2021. Committee recommends approval, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for the technical committee on item 5D, the import application of PG&E Diablo Canyon? Hearing none, we'll move on to a motion.
I make a motion we approve the import application from Pacific Gas and Electric Company Diablo Canyon Power Plant number 1-0254-00. Waste class is Class A, Class B, and Class C. The waste form is stable and unstable. The waste stream is polymer solidified resin, cement encapsulating filters, and dewatered resin. The volume is 550 cubic feet. The total radioactivity is 335 curies. Waste will originate from the state of California, so an export authorization will be required. And the agreement would terminate August 31, 2021.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion about the import application of PG&E Diablo Canyon? Any public comment on item 5D, the import application of PG&E Diablo Canyon? Seeing no hands raised, we will move on to a vote. All in favor of the motion to approve the import application of PG&E Diablo Canyon represented in item 5D in our agenda, please indicate so by saying aye.
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 All opposed, no. Motion passes. We will now move on to item 5E, which is the import applications of Perkin-Elmer, which is tab 13 in your electronic notebooks, commissioners. And we will once again turn it back over to Vice Chairman Salzman.
So I got to get there in the meeting packet. Here we go. The technical committee has received and reviewed an import application from Perkin-Elmer that was received June 2nd, 2020. It's number 1-0255-00. Perkin-Elmer is a generator requesting authorization to dispose of waste in accordance with the Act. They are requesting authorization for Class A and Class B unstable, non-compactable trash, laboratory trash, PPE, paper, plastic, metal, and glassware collected in metal and PVC canisters and nylon mylar bags, and solidified tritiated water. And all of those waste streams were approved for disposal at the site via letter from TCEQ dated June 29, 2020. Perkin-Elmer is requesting 200 cubic feet of volume and 1,500 curies of radioactivity. The waste will originate from Massachusetts, which is an unaffiliated state. And Perkin-Elmer has requested an agreement with a termination date of August 31, 2021. The technical committee recommends approval, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I have one question, John, then we'll ask for others. This volume to curie seems higher than some of our earlier applications, but it's only Class A and B waste. What kind of waste is it that makes it so hot?
My suspicion, based on previous applications that they've submitted and discussions that we've had previously, it's the tritiated water. Perkin-Elmer is a radionuclide manufacturer, and tritium actually, particularly when the tritium that they manufacture and then sell to others, typically has a pretty high curie content. And so when they have to get rid of water, it's usually got a lot of tritium in it, a lot of contaminant, and that's what drives the curie content up, but the volume's relatively small.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. That makes perfect sense. Any other questions for the technical committee on the import application of Perkin-Elmer? Well, then we can move on to a motion.
I make a motion we approve the import application from Perkin-Elmer. It's number 1-0255-00. The waste class is Class A and Class B. The waste form is unstable. The waste stream is non-compactable trash, laboratory trash, PPE, paper, plastic, metal, and glassware collected in metal and PVC canisters and mylar bags, and solidified tritiated water. The volume is 200 cubic feet. The total radioactivity is 2,500 curies. The waste will come from the state of Massachusetts, and the agreement would terminate August 31, 2021.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion on item 5E, the import application of Perkin-Elmer? Any public comment on item 5E? We've been joined by Commissioner Sadek. Hello, Commissioner. Thank you for joining. No problem. Seeing no public comment, I think that means we can move on to a vote. All in favor of the motion to approve the import applications of Perkin-Elmer, represented by item 5E in the agenda, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Motion passes. We will now move on to item 5F, which is tab 14 in your notebooks. That is the import application of Next Era Point Beach. Once again, the technical committee.
The technical committee has received and reviewed an import application from Next Era Energy Point Beach, LLC. It was received June 2, 2020. It's number 1-0256-00. Point Beach is a generator requesting authorization to dispose of waste in accordance with the Act. They've requested authorization for Class B and Class C unstable plant liquid cleanup resins, and that waste stream was approved by TCEQ via letter authorization dated June 29, 2020. They've requested a volume of 125.2 cubic feet and a total radioactivity of 300 curies. The waste will originate from the state of Wisconsin, which is part of the Midwest Compact. It does not require export authorization. And they have requested an agreement with the termination date of August 31, 2021. The technical committee recommends approval, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
And I have another question that's probably universal, and it's maybe a preview of something we're going to talk about later. But the definition of Class A, B, and C waste, is it solely based on curie content or curie concentration?
It depends on some of the radionuclides as well, but it's primarily based on concentration. Lisa, you probably have the definition memorized. I don't. Class B and Class C sometimes has to do with what the likely radiation level is of the waste, as well as some of the longer-lived radionuclides that can be contained within the waste. But Lisa, why don't you jump in there?
Yeah, the waste that contains the activity, there's a limit for each radionuclide and for each class. So tritium has a limit, cobalt has a limit, etc. And there's a limit for Class A and Class B and Class C. Not all radionuclides have limits in every category, but that's a good general description. You take the actual activity in the waste and you divide it by that limit, you get a fraction of that limit. If you're over the limit, you're in the next waste class. But you get a fraction for each one of your radionuclides, and you sum those fractions. If it's over 1 for all the limits that are listed for Class A, then it goes to Class B. If it's the sum of the fractions is over 1 for all the limits for Class B, it becomes Class C. Goes over the Class C limits, it's greater than Class C.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And so in this instance, we have 125 cubic feet and 300 curies, but it's listed all as B and C. So not knowing what all the nuclides are, there is not it's not as simple as saying, well, if you have 2 curies per cubic foot, then you're definitely going to be class B. It is more complicated than that.
Depends upon how much activity you have and what volume of waste and what the activity is. So tritium, you can have a lot of tritium in your waste, and but if it's, you know, nickel 63, it's gonna, or strontium, those have much lower limits, and it'll drive the class up much more quickly with only a small amount of that type of activity in the waste.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. Is there any other questions for the technical committee?
I do. I have a question for John. John, this says plant liquid cleanup resins. Are there other potential hazmat in this beyond radioactive materials? I don't, just, you know, metals or PCBs, things like that. And just assuming so, for the sake of argument, this says unsealed. Is this in a container where those would be adequately contained for long-term storage to prevent leaching?
Yes, that's part of the requirement of being able to actually ship the waste is that it must be properly containerized. Plant liquid cleanup resins is really referring to resins that are used to help clean the water. So plants require the water to be high purity. Yeah. So use resins to pull the impurities out of the water.
Okay.
It's virtual. I would say it is highly unlikely that there would be anything like PCBs or any sort of RCRA kind of contaminant. There theoretically could be trace metals or something like that in the waste, but it would only be minute quantities.
And even if it was, it'd be adequately contained.
I'm sorry, say again?
These containers would be adequate for that purpose.
Required for shipping purposes, yes, absolutely.
And Commissioner Mundy,
yes, ma'am.
The type of waste that you're talking about that would have both hazardous properties or constituents and radioactivity is called mixed waste. Mm-hmm. Plants are required by regulation to monitor for both of those types of activities and to have programs in place to know when they have a mixed waste versus just a radioactive waste. And they have to certify on their shipping paperwork that, in fact, it's not hazardous when they ship it as strictly radioactive. So I think there are pretty rigid or prescriptive programs in place that cause plants to have to identify the actual properties of the waste that they're offering for shipment or disposal.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Hearing none, I think we can move on to a motion
then. I make a motion that we approve the import application from Next Era Energy Point Beach LLC, number 1-0256-00. The waste class is Class B and Class C. The waste form is unstable. The waste description is plant liquid cleanup resins. The volume is 125.2 cubic feet. The total radioactivity is 300 curies. The waste will originate from the state of Wisconsin. And the agreement would have a termination date of August 31, 2021.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion about item 5F, the import application of NextEra Point Beach? Any public comment on item 5F? Seeing none, we will move on to a vote then. All in favor of the motion to approve the import application of NextEra Point Beach, please indicate so by saying aye.
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 All opposed, no. Motion passes. We can now move on to item 5G, which is the import application of TVA, and it is tab 15 in your electronic notebooks. And I will turn it back over to the Vice Chairman.
The technical committee has received and reviewed an import application from Tennessee Valley Authority. It was received June 2nd, 2020, and it's number 1-0257-00. TVA is a generator requesting authorization to dispose of waste in accordance with the Act. They've requested authorization for Class A, Class B, and Class C unstable dewatered bead and/or Powdex resin, sources, filters, and compactable and non-compactable trash. And those waste streams were approved for disposal at the site via letter correspondence from TCEQ dated June 29, 2020. TVA's requested a volume of 14,472 cubic feet and a total radioactivity of 1,260 curies. The waste will originate from Alabama and Tennessee, which are both part of the Southeast Compact and do not require export authorization. And TVA has requested an agreement for fiscal year 2021, so that would have a termination date of August 31, 2021. The technical committee recommends approval, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for the technical committee on item 5G, the import application of TVA? Hearing none, we can move on to a motion.
I make a motion that we approve the import application from Tennessee Valley Authority number 1-0257-00. The waste class is Class A, Class B, and Class C. The waste form is unstable. The waste stream is dewatered bead and/or Powdex resin, sources, filters, and compactable and non-compactable trash. The volume is 14,472 cubic feet, and the total radioactivity is 1,260 curies. The waste will originate from Alabama and Tennessee, and the agreement would have a termination date of August 31, 2021.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion about item 5G on our agenda, the import application of TVA? Any public comment on item 5G? Seeing no hands raised, we can move on to a vote. All in favor of the motion to approve the import application of the Tennessee Valley Authority represented in item 5G on our agenda, please indicate so by saying aye.
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 All opposed, no. Motion passes. John, I know we've been wearing you out. Do you need a break now, or do you want to power on through?
Actually, I have something I need to do really quickly. So if we could take maybe a 5 or 10 minute break, that would be really well for me.
Okay, the time is now 9:45. So let's try to be back by 9:55. Does that give you enough time, John?
Plenty.
All right, we will take a break. We will mute everyone. Well, okay, I think we can get back to it. It is now 9:57. Andrew, do we need to start the recording again?
The recording is started. Go ahead.
Okay, we are back. We appreciate everyone indulging us on that break. As some of you probably know, John is on the COVID-19 task force for the University of Texas, so he has got very big fish to fry these days. So I'm sure he's already solved the issue in the last 10 minutes. So we can now move on to item 5H, which is the import agreement of Bionomics, who Commissioner Mundy, this is the first of our broker applications. So with that, I will turn it back over to John.
The technical committee has received and reviewed an import application from Bionomics, Inc. It was received June 3, 2020. It's number 1-0258-00. In this case, Bionomics is a broker who is a licensed waste processor and collector requesting authorization to dispose of waste in accordance with the Act. They're requesting authorization for Class A, Class B, and Class C stable and unstable sealed sources in containers, including depleted uranium shielding, either separately or used to shield sources. Those waste streams were approved for disposal at the site via letter correspondence from TCEQ dated June 29, 2020. Bionomics is requesting a volume of 350 cubic feet and a total radioactivity of 1,000 curies. They've indicated that the waste will originate from all states except Texas and Vermont, including Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. And based on that list, any waste that would originate from the Northwest, Southwestern, or Rocky Mountain compacts will require export authorization. And to date, the applicant has not provided generator authorizations or export authorizations. And as Brandon indicated, this Bionomics is a broker. They have requested an agreement that would terminate August 31, 2021. And they've also indicated the waste is from small quantity generators. And based on the volume, curies, and description, the commission agrees. The technical committee recommends approval, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
And John, correct me if I'm wrong, but the round numbers you see here of 1,000 and 350, that's because of the situation we talked about before, where brokers kind of reserve this kind of capacity and curie limit, and then go out and offer their services to people who need a broker, correct?
That is correct.
Any other questions on the import application of Bionomics for the technical committee? Hearing none, we can move on to a motion.
I make a motion that we approve the import application from Bionomics, Inc. It's number 1-0258-00. The waste class is Class A, Class B, and it's Class C. The waste form is stable and unstable. The waste description is sealed sources in containers, included depleted uranium shielding, either separately or used to shield sources. The volume is 350 cubic feet. The total radioactivity is 1,000 curies. The waste will originate from all states except Texas and Vermont. So any waste, all states except Texas and Vermont, including Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. So any waste that would originate from the Northwest, Southwestern, or Rocky Mountain compacts will require export authorization. And so Bionomics will have to provide those export authorizations and generator authorizations via correspondence to the commission. The agreement would terminate August 31, 2021, and the waste will actually be totaled against the small quantity generator set aside.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion about item 5H, the import application of Bionomics? Hearing none, we will move on to public comment. John McCormick did have his hand raised, but I think he took it down.
Nope.
There it is again. Sorry. John, I've unmuted your line and you can talk. You may have to unmute it on your end as well.
There we go. Sorry about that, everyone.
Thank
The Northwest Compact does not require an export permit. They have no mechanism in place to regulate the the exportation of sources. So I've talked to them. I do have an email. I previously provided it to Lee, and I can provide it to anybody else, but we won't need one for the Northwest Compact.
Technically, John is correct. The Northwest Compact doesn't actually have official adopted language that requires export permits. They have requested that our commission would ask for them, but there is no absolute requirement. And they have granted export authorizations via email correspondence with our commission previously.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Any other questions about item 5H, the import application of Bionomics?
So I seconded that, and so does John need to change his motion to include that email thing between the Northwest, just to keep us on record?
I'll amend my motion to indicate that there is no strict requirement for an export authorization from the Northwest Compact.
Okay,
And do you second that amended motion again, Judge?
I do.
As amended, does anyone have any additional questions about? And John, your hand was still raised. I didn't know if you had another comment or, oh, never mind.
No, so sorry. Thank
That's
you.
okay. Hearing no further comments or questions, we will move on to a vote. All in favor of the motion to approve the import application of Bionomics represented by item 5H in our agenda, please indicate so by saying aye.
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 All opposed, no. Motion passes. We can now move on to item 5I, which is the import application of Exelon generation, which is represented in tab 17 on your electronic notebooks, Commissioners. We will turn it back over to Vice Chairman Salzman.
The technical committee has received and reviewed an import application from Exelon Generation that was received June 4, 2020, and it's number 1-0259-00. In this case, Exelon is a generator requesting authorization to dispose of waste in accordance with the Act. They are requesting authorization for Class A, Class B, and Class C, stable and unstable, dewatered bead and Powdex resin, condensate filter sludge, decontamination resins, fuel pool skimmer filter sludge, non-fuel reactor components, process filters, reactor water cleanup resins, reactor water demineralizer resins, and large components. And all of those waste streams were approved for disposal at the site via letter of correspondence from TCEQ dated June 29, 2020. Exelon is requesting a volume of 4,256 cubic feet and a total radioactivity of 6,500 curies. They've indicated that the waste will originate from Illinois, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and New York, which are part of the Central Midwest and Appalachian compacts, and New York being unaffiliated. And none of those compacts require export authorization. In addition, they've requested an agreement that would terminate August 31, 2021. The technical committee recommends approval, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for the technical committee on the import application of Exelon? John, what is our floor for the contingent curie program?
15,000, I believe.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions about item 5I, the import application of Exelon? Hearing none, I think we can move on to a motion.
I make a motion we approve the import application from Exelon Generation. That's number 1-0259-00. The waste class is Class A, Class B, and Class C. The waste form is stable and unstable. The waste description is dewatered bead and Powdex resin, condensate filter sludge, decontamination resins, fuel pool skimmer filter sludge, non-fuel reactor components, process filters, reactor water cleanup resins, reactor water demineralizer resins, and large components. The volume is 4,256 cubic feet. The total radioactivity is 6,500 curies. The waste will originate from Illinois, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and New York. And the agreement would terminate August 31, 2021.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion about the import application of Exelon Generation represented by item 5I in our agenda?
Unknown caller. Unknown caller.
Any public comment on item 5I? Hearing none, I think we can move on to a vote. All in favor of the motion to approve the import application of Exelon Generation represented by item 5I in our agenda, please indicate so by saying aye.
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 All opposed, no. Motion passes.
Yeah.
We will now move on to item 5J, which is the first import application from Energy Solutions as a generator. With that, we will turn it back over to the technical committee.
The technical committee has received and reviewed an import application from Energy Solutions. It was received June 4, 2020, and it's number 1-0260-00. Energy Solutions in this case is a generator requesting authorization to dispose of waste in accordance with the Act. They are requesting authorization for Class B and Class C unstable reformed residue from thermally processed resin filters. You may have a typo, resin and dry activated waste. And those waste streams were authorized for disposal at the site via letter of correspondence from TCEQ dated June 29, 2020. They are requesting a volume of 650 cubic feet and a total radioactivity of 7,500 curies. The waste will originate from the state of Tennessee, which is part of the Southeast Compact. It does not require export authorization. And they have requested an agreement with the termination date of August 31, 2021. Generally, the technical committee recommends approval. I would note that Energy Solutions also has an agreement as a broker, and this has happened previously. It's a little curious because their generator application and their broker application are quite similar. They are exactly the same in terms of volume and curies. The waste streams are different. We've asked about this in the past, and it was a little unclear exactly why that occurs that way. In the past, the indication was that it's not always easy for them to decide in advance whether they're going to be a broker on a waste stream or a generator on a waste stream, which technically I can understand that, but programmatically it's a little harder for me to understand it. It's almost as if they are being allowed to decide, well, we want to be a generator or we want to be a broker. And that makes me a little bit uncomfortable. Perhaps it's because I don't understand the process that they are using to make those decisions. So given that explanation, I would say the technical committee is generally approval of this import application. But I'd be happy to attempt to answer questions, or perhaps Energy Solutions is on the line and they can answer those questions or issues.
So John, what is the advantage or disadvantage of being a broker versus a generator?
It's unclear to me. I don't know why they are doing it this way, but I see that I think somebody from Energy Solutions.
Yeah.
Vern, may I just ask, does Energy Solutions own plants? I mean,
they do not own any. They do not own.
Idea of generation.
Zion. They have the license. They're the license holder of record for Zion, and they're decommissioning.
That is correct. But they don't own any operating nuclear power facilities.
Vern Rogers from Energy Solutions raised his hand, so I've unmuted Vern's line. Vern, are you with us?
Yes, I am, and I appreciate it. As Vice Chairman Sullivan has said, decision as to whether we act as a broker or just simply as a generator, generally, there's a lot of things that go into those decisions. Sometimes they're strictly business. There are other things that are contractually limited based on the customers that we're working with. I'd be happy to prepare kind of a more detailed description. I can provide that to the Vice Chair for discussion in your next meeting. But we do appreciate the ability to be able to accommodate the generators that we're working with in order to make sure we have that access.
Can I ask a question? Chairman Hurley?
Sure, absolutely.
Vern, when you guys act as a broker, you're not taking title to the waste. But are there times when people send you waste that you reform or condition in some way or commingle from multiple generators that in your process results in you creating a unique or new waste stream that you take title to?
Yes.
And that also would then constitute you as the generator of that waste.
Right. In our facilities in Tennessee, as we thermally process resins and filters and things like that, the ash that's left over afterwards is attributed to us. And we still track what waste has gone into those processes and provide that to the compactor when we make those shipments. But in those cases, the state of Tennessee allows that waste to be attributed to us as we are the generator.
Yeah. So the way I understand it, let's make sure I have this straight, at least in my mind. You process waste from multiple entities across the country. And when you do that, byproducts are produced that in the state of Tennessee, although you track the waste stream and where it came from that produced waste byproducts in the state of Tennessee, those byproducts can be attributed to you as a generator, and you effectively take title to that waste. And when you offer it for transportation and disposal, you would be listed as the generator. In other cases, people may send you waste from their facilities, which you package or condition in some way, and then you offer it for transport and disposal. But in that process, you are acting as a middleman in the processing or conditioning of that waste prior to disposal, but you don't take title to it. Is that?
In those cases, it's just simply aggregation of waste and packaging and stabilization, and there isn't the same degree of processing involved where there would be some type of a residue created where we would take title. And to answer the other question, no, we do not own any current operating plants. We are involved in several decommissioning plants, and depending on the nature of the license transfer, there are times when we are the licensee as in science, but we don't operate any nuclear plants.
Any more questions for Mr. Rogers before we let him go? Yes, sir.
I guess I don't quite follow. So supposing people dispose of their waste, people who run the plants to dispose of their waste at Energy Solutions. Now, Energy Solutions, I tell you, can't take B and C waste. So they might turn around. They would charge whatever they charge for that disposal. They then would turn around and want to ship the B and C waste to WCS, I guess, who in turn charge for that disposal. What I don't understand is why do the generators not have the capacity, some of these generators, to separate out the B and C and deal directly with WCS, or come into this commission to ship it into WCS themselves?
I don't necessarily have the authority to speak on behalf of our generators, but oftentimes when we're acting as a broker, we are aggregating multiple waste streams from multiple different generators. So
I'm sorry, you're not coming through well to me. I don't know whether everybody else can hear you or not. But
yeah, he's kind of garbled.
see if I can speak up then. Obviously, I don't have the authority or the understanding of the operating power plants and some of the limitations that they work under. But as a broker, we will aggregate waste streams from multiple sources so that there is volumetric and efficiencies that we offer to the customer. And those wastes then, if they are Class B and C, are shipped to the Texas site. It's also subject to export authorization from wherever the location might be and the compact that they're trying to export that waste out of, so that it can be processed if it's going to be processed, or if it can be aggregated as a broker and shipped to Texas. So there are multiple different decision points that come into play as to whether or not we're processing the waste or simply aggregating, packaging, and shipping.
Vern, do you still blend waste?
Yes, we have several processes, thermal processes, as well as cold blending processes in Texas that we mainly with resins.
Commissioner Sadek, my understanding is that at times plants may have very small volumes of higher activity waste, and they may have very large volumes of lower activity waste. And they may choose a processor to send that waste to that has the ability to combine those waste streams together. And that offers at times advantages on concentration averaging. So you blend these two waste streams together, the resulting mixture meets the requirements in the branch technical position on concentration averaging, so that the total activity can be averaged over the total volume, and that can result in lower disposal costs if it lowers the waste class. In some cases that may not be possible, and there may be other processes people want to have applied to their waste streams so that the packaging is more efficient or more stable or in some way improved. And they may choose a broker like Energy Solutions to perform that function. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner Edwards. You certainly put it a lot more succinctly than I did. I appreciate that.
But correct me if I misspeak, Vern.
No, ma'am, you've got it exactly right.
Any other questions for Vern before we let him go?
Well, I just think that this is good to be talking about, since they've wanted to decommission other power units. This may come up again.
I agree. Thank you very much, Vern.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the technical committee?
I would just have a comment for the technical committee. It does seem a little strange that there are two applications, one as a broker and one as a generator, for very similar volumes and activity levels. But I think that's just sort of a surface impression when you understand their role of acting as a broker and also being a license holder for a facility that's going through decommissioning, and the different rules associated with commingling waste and when byproducts are produced or not. There's probably some level of uncertainty of how much of the waste they generated will actually be owned by them as a generator versus brokered by them as just a processor. So I guess I get the initial reaction to these two applications being quite similar, but I'm comfortable with that, the validity of the application, given the uncertainty that they start the year out with, not knowing exactly what waste they'll get.
I think I would agree. The explanation that we got today from Mr. Rogers was actually quite helpful, and that's probably the best information that we've gotten to date on this subject. I do think it would be beneficial for our commission to receive something written from Energy Solutions, that's sort of a written document that explains this process, but based on that explanation, I'm much more comfortable with the current application, or applications, I should say.
So any other questions for the technical committee on this first import application of Energy Solutions? Hearing none, I think we can, have we made our motion?
Not yet.
Then we can move on to our motion.
All right. I make a motion, we approve the import application from Energy Solutions as a generator. It is number 1-0260-00. The waste class is Class B and Class C. The waste form is unstable. The waste description is reformed residue from thermally processed resin, filters, and dry active waste. The volume is 650 cubic feet. The total radioactivity is 7,500 curies. The waste will originate from the state of Tennessee, and the waste agreement would have a termination date of August 31, 2021.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion about the first import application of Energy Solutions represented by item 5J? Any public comment about item 5J? Hearing none, we can move on to a vote. All in favor of the motion, please indicate so by saying aye.
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 All opposed, no. Motion passes. Andrew, I think we lost Linda. I'm not sure if it's a technical issue or not. We can now move on to item 5K, which is the second import application of Energy Solutions, this time as a broker. I will turn it back over to the Vice Chairman.
The technical committee has received and reviewed an import application from Energy Solutions as a broker. It's was dated June 4, 2020, and it's number 1-0261-00. In this case, Energy Solutions is a broker that is a licensed waste processor requesting authorization to dispose of waste in accordance with the Act. They have requested authorization for Class B and Class C unstable activated metal, dry active waste, dewatered bead resin, filter media, mechanical filters, metal, and soil. And those waste streams were approved for disposal at the site via letter correspondence from TCQ dated June 29, 2020. In this case, they're requesting a volume of 650 cubic feet and a total radioactivity of 7,500 curies. They've indicated that the waste will originate from all states except Texas and Vermont, including Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. So any waste originating from the Southwestern or Rocky Mountain compacts will require export authorization. Waste originating from the Northwest Compact does not officially require an export authorization. But the Energy Solutions has not provided those generator authorizations or the export authorizations. So those would have to be provided to our administrative staff. They have requested an agreement with a termination date of August 31, 2021. And based on our earlier discussion, the technical committee recommends approval. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for the technical committee on the second Energy Solutions import application? Hearing none, we'll move on to a motion.
Make a motion, we approve the import application from Energy Solutions as a broker. It's number 1-0261-00. Waste class is Class B and Class C. The waste form is unstable. The waste stream is activated metal, dry active waste, dewatered bead resin, filter media, mechanical filters, metal, and soil. The volume is 650 cubic feet. The total radioactivity is 7,500 curies. The waste will originate from all states except Texas and Vermont, including Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. And Energy Solutions is required to provide export authorizations and generator authorizations via future correspondence. And the agreement would have a termination date of August 31, 2021.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion about item 5K, the second import application of Energy Solutions? Any public comment on item 5K? Seeing no hands, we'll move on to a vote. All in favor of the motion to approve the second import application of Energy Solutions, please indicate so by saying aye.
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 All opposed, no. Motion passes. And that concludes item 5. Before we move on, I will make a quick housekeeping note. Item 7, which is a consideration of request for export authorization, is going to be moved and is going to be done after item 11. Based on the discussion that we think may happen, the two may dovetail together, and therefore we thought it would be best to put those two together. So item 7 will be moved till after item 11. With that, we can move on to item 6 in the agenda, which is a consideration of requested amendments to import application agreements. We only have one, which is tab 20 in your notebooks, Commissioners, and it is the requested amendment of the Indiana-Michigan Power Company. I will turn it back over to the Vice Chairman. I believe this one is pretty simple.
The technical committee has received and reviewed a request to amend the import application from Indiana Michigan Power DC Cook Plant. That was received May 20, 2020, and it's number 1-0237-01. And in this case, DC Cook has requested an increase in the volume from 1,000 cubic feet to 1,500 cubic feet to account for waste that was originally scheduled to be shipped in 2021. However, funding is now available, so they'd like to make the shipment in this fiscal year. TCEQ did approve this. They've already approved, but they reapproved this waste via letter dated June 29, 2020. DC Cook is not requesting any other changes to the import agreement. So it's really just a volume increase from 1,000 cubic feet to 1,530 cubic feet. The technical committee recommends approval. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions about the amendment request of the Indiana Michigan Power DC Cook plant? Hearing none, we can move on to a motion.
I make a motion we approve the request from DC Cook. We will increase the volume from 1,000 to 1,530 cubic feet.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion about item 6 on our agenda, the amendment request of Indiana Michigan Power DC Cook plant? Any public comment on the amendment request? Seeing none, we will move on to a vote. All in favor of approving the amendment requested by Indiana Michigan Power Plant for the DC Cook plant, represented in item 6 on our agenda, please indicate so by saying aye.
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 All opposed, no. Motion passes. As I just said, we're going to skip over 7 and take it up after we have our discussion about our contingency plan. So with that, we will move on to item 8, which is the report from WCS. And with that, we will call upon Dave Carlson, and I will open his line. Good morning, Dave.
Good morning, Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks so much. Just a few items for today. Let me talk about compact facility capacity first. And starting with the fiscal year that began on September 1st through current, in compact waste, we've disposed of 13,484 cubic feet and 636 curies. Out of compact, we've disposed of 22,498 cubic feet and 20,814 curies. For the overall disposal through from the beginning of the facility, we've disposed of 185,578 cubic feet, which is now 2.06% of the licensed capacity. So over the past 10 years, we've consumed 2% of the licensed capacity. And that's 482,222 curies decayed, which is 12.4% of the licensed capacity. Moving on to quarterly payments. In June, we made quarterly payments to TCEQ and Andrews County. So the most recent payment to TCEQ was almost 1.3 million, and Andrews County was about 209,000. And those were at the end of the month of June. The totals since inception are 58 million to date. Paid to TCEQ, 13 million paid to Andrews County, and that's 71 million total in surcharges that are applied to waste disposal of the facility. In terms of recent site operations, we, of course, are being careful like everyone else relative to COVID-19, but we're in full operation and have continued in full operation through the entire COVID-19 pandemic and intend to continue to do so. In terms of other matters that we'd like to bring, I know it's later on the agenda, but on the VLLW interpretive rulemaking, WCS is opposed to that, and we will provide comments to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission by the July 20th deadline to provide those comments. And that's all I have. Any questions?
Maybe Wilbur wants to go.
Chairman, I think you're muted.
Thank you, Dave. The WCS reports were tab 23 in your notebook. So I'll give you a second to review those and ask if anyone has any questions for Mr. Carlson.
Well, I wonder whether if Dave knows what's at work here. I mean, the idea of taking radioactive waste and dumping it, putting it in some garbage trucks and dumping it in a landfill, the local landfill, strikes me as kind of beyond the pale. I mean, what's going on? Who's behind this, and why are they seriously considering it?
Commissioner, I can't speak to the motivations of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I imagine that there's some desire to create more opportunity for disposal of some wastes in other places, whether that's individual companies that desire that, or whether that's waste generators. You'd have to ask the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
Well, come on. I mean, there's got to be more of an answer than that. Do you think the generators are just looking for a less expensive way to do it, or do you think that some of the really large landfill operators are big contributors to a campaign, or what? I mean, there's just got to be something behind this.
Can I comment on this?
Sure.
All right. So it is a very complex topic. It starts with the fact that we generally accept in the United States that there are different levels of activity that require different levels of isolation. That is exactly why we have a compact disposal cell that accepts the higher activity BC waste. And there are other disposal cells, Clyde in particular, that accepts Class A waste. So the idea that there are different disposal requirements imposed upon those waste streams based upon their radiotoxicity and the hazard that they potentially represent to future generations. So the isolation requirements, et cetera, are different for Class B and C waste than they are for Class A waste. In most countries, there are more divisions or classifications than just what most countries call low-level waste and intermediate-level waste, or what we call Class A, B, and C waste. There's something called very low-level waste, and there are also exempt levels of waste. We don't have those classifications. So waste that is lightly contaminated building rubble, let's say from decommissioning and tearing down buildings at BY, or removing very low levels of contamination of soil that is very, very large volumes with extremely low levels of activity, are subject to the same disposal requirements that some of the resins that are produced in purifying water are subjected to, because some of those resins are Class A resins and can go into a Class A disposal cell. So the company I work for, which is EPRI, has actually done research related to what are the disposal requirements imposed on that classification that most of the world refers to as very low-level waste. And those requirements are very similar to what WCS has done with the RCRA cell in the low-activity waste stream. So we call it LAW, most of the world calls it very low-level waste. And EPRI produced reports that just did a comparison between the disposal requirements that type of waste is subjected to around the world in comparison to RCRA facilities. I always forget because it's been a few years since we did that work, but it's subtitle C or whatever the subtitle is. It is the industrial landfills. Compare favorably to that type of disposal environment. That's exactly what WCS has. the NRC has done is they're looking at this, and from my understanding of the conversation, they're potentially proposing that not only Subtitle C, but also Subtitle D are municipal landfills would also be considered. So that's different than what the research is that my company did. Nonetheless, and that's part of the public record, anybody in this meeting or on this commission can go and look at those reports. But we never in our research suggested that the municipal landfills were suitable. We strictly did our comparison to Subtitle C. There are very different costs related to disposing of that very low activity waste in a lower, in a RCRA cell versus a compact facility cell. That's the whole business case behind the RCRA cell that WCS has and taking the low activity waste stream there. Right now, in the United States, there are several disposal sites that accept this type of waste, and they are RCRA facilities, and they use an exemption process under 10 CFR 20.2002. So in that case, a generator has to have a discrete volume of waste that they go to the NRC, they evaluate the characteristics of that waste, and they give permission to dispose of it in this alternate disposal facility, which is fairly onerous process. And there is some concern about how are those decisions made on granting those exemptions or not. So some of the interest in the industry has centered around, if this is an acceptable practice that has long been established and is being applied, why don't we make it, classify that waste and define it as very low level waste and create the requirements associated with it. The recent activity that occurred related to one of our licensees in Texas who was sending very low activity waste to an alternate disposal site that was approved by the state of Texas, an agreement state, to receive that waste was challenged. There's some citations that happened that said, hey, you're an NRC licensee and you have to get permission from us to go to this alternate disposal site. If they had sent it to a licensed facility broker and that person processed it and sent it to the exact same place that that licensee had sent it to, it would have been fine. But because they sent it directly without that middleman, there was a challenge to it because of the licensing requirements. It sort of resurfaced the whole discussion on very low level waste and how it's handled and what the historical practices and precedents have been. And that conversation, those two conversations have started to commingle. There's a need to address and clarify what the actual requirements are now related to very low level waste streams that are being sent to alternate disposal facilities today and have been for years. So there's historical precedent and this new happening. And so someone needs to clarify what the rules are going forward. Meanwhile, there was always this conversation, or has been this conversation for close to a decade now, going on defining very low level waste and recognizing that the isolation requirements for that type of waste, it just doesn't represent the same level of hazard that higher levels of activity waste do. So there's been a push to consider how should that be addressed in the United States, and is there some kind of alignment that could be created relative to how other countries treat the same hazard. So
well, oh, I'm sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry, Lisa.
It's a complex issue. From my perspective as a commissioner on this commission, I think that the facilities that WCS has, not only the compact cell, but the RCRA cell and the types of waste that they're putting in the RCRA cell that TCEQ has licensed and has careful controls over, I'm quite comfortable with that. And I think they're considering similar types of things by the NRC, but some of the limits that they've suggested are quite different than what TCEQ has imposed on the low activity waste cell at WCS So that's raised some eyebrows, and the inclusion of municipal landfills rather than industrial landfills under RCRA has also raised some eyebrows. And that's where the conversation, my understanding, is mostly centering.
Well, I can't compete with you in terms of knowledge of this subject. All I can say is that, you have a municipal landfill in Vermont, okay? And there's a guy there. He's got a scale, and trucks come in, weighs the thing, and then they go and dump. So I guess what you're saying is that one way or another, that would basically continue, but that we should we should trust the nuclear industry when that garbage truck backs up to their door to make sure that waste is properly measured and that the pregnant women who come up and dump their trash in that municipal landfill have nothing to worry about. I mean, well, really, seriously.
I hear what you're saying. Okay, I think in the United States have a system that's basically trust but verify. We write rules. Generators of waste have to follow those rules. And if we just trusted them to send it to the right place, there'd be no regulators. But there are, in fact, regulators that go in and inspect the practices of the plant and can impose enforcement fines and activities, restrictions on plants if they don't comply. Same way, TCEQ can block people from disposing of waste in our Texas facilities if they don't comply with the regulations that have been cited for safe disposal in our facilities.
What is EPRI's position on this? Has EPRI taken a position on this regulation?
What we did is we did research that said, what are the characteristics of this waste? How do other countries dispose of this type of waste? What type of environments do they require? And compared it to RCRA facilities, Subtitle C, hazardous industrial RCRA facilities, to the international disposal requirements, and we found that they compared favorably. We put out a description in a second report of how you might define very low level waste. There's a lot of spread across the globe on what constitutes very low level waste. And I think in our work, we use 5 millirem for the limit, and sort of showed how you would do a back calculation for a generic definition. It wasn't meant to establish that 5 was the right number, just how you would go about it if you were doing it on a dose limit for a generic site. I think the NRC, in your scenario about the municipal landfill, for people to use a municipal or any other alternate disposal for radioactive waste in the United States right now, they have to get approval to do that. There has to be a license process, and the facility has to be granted authority or approval to receive that waste by an agreement state or by the NRC, or by going through an exemption process. This would, the proposed rule as I understand it, would still subject even municipal landfills to some kind of review process by the NRC in order for them to accept that waste. The concern is that that review process may not be as rigorous as what our traditional disposal facilities that are designed for radioactive waste have been subjected to.
The last time I took some waste to one of our municipal landfills, I had to wait for a while, and the reason was that they had to remove the apple pies from the oven, and they would be with me in about 20 minutes. And then the lady who was running the landfill came out and said, "What do you got?" I said, "A couple of copper pipes or something." She says, "Over there to the left." I mean, honestly, and when you get on the kind of scale of, these huge haulers in Jersey and stuff like that, and they begin to see a profit center because they can come in under what WCS is charging or something like that. And the nuclear industry certainly sees a profit center because they can dispose of it a hell of a lot cheaper in some of these landfills. And I can assure you that the lady with the apple pies doesn't charge what they usually pay to dispose of radioactive waste. I mean, the thing just seems crazy to me.
So there's two things at play here, right? As a commissioner here, I am interested in protecting the viability of the disposal site that we have created for our compact members at considerable cost to both states, but particularly to Texas, so that there is a proper disposal site for all of the radioactive waste that's generated within our compact. I think there's a big investment. I think it is something that we have an obligation to do because this waste is being generated within the compact, and we are responsibly approaching our requirements to provide a long-term disposal facility for that type of waste. And I'm proud to be part of that process. If people choose other sort of directions to go, or a different way to look at it, is that balances against that perspective, is just a strictly science question. A given substance has a hazard associated with it, and that hazard should define what the disposal requirements are around it. Artificially creating excessive requirements that are not justified by the hazard that is represented by that waste does create an unnecessary financial burden on people, generators that do get passed on to their members of the public that are paying down the road for the cost of the waste. That's part of the cost of generating the electricity. So there's a real balance between what does the hazard say it really needs, which isn't a business case question, that's a science question. But what we're doing today here and what we do as members of this commission is look at protecting the viability of this disposal site for future generations of Texans and the folks in Vermont. So there's a balance, and you have to kind of balance both of those, or way in my mind, I personally want to consider both of those and telling you what I think about a particular approach related to very low level waste or any other waste stream. They're both pertinent to me.
And obviously this will be a part of the discussion that I guess we will not have to have now when it comes to item 10 on our agenda, which is the comment letter that has been drafted and some proposed revisions that each of you probably have. So this is a good discussion to have, but we will also continue it probably on item 10 when we decide exactly what we want our comment letter to the NRC to say. So I don't want to squelch any of the discussion, but I also want you to know that we will obviously be having something similar when we get to item 10 as well.
Well, I apologize for the detour.
No, it's okay.
Thank you,
I think
Lisa,
it's
for
good
that.
questions, actually. The one thing I would throw in there is that we would not want to subject Vermont Yankee or South Texas Project or Comanche Peak to paying the disposal rates for the compact cell for that very low level waste, or for even low activity waste, as what has been defined as suitable for the RCRA cell at WCS. TCEQ said this waste with these types of characteristics can go into that RCRA cell. It costs our in-compact generators less to dispose of it in that RCRA cell instead of the compact cell. And we're comfortable with that. And the state of Texas is comfortable with that. There's an analogy, there are similarities to even to to other disposal facilities besides the RCRA cell, and that's what's being debated. We shouldn't impose, or there's at least a science argument that says we shouldn't impose restrictions above and beyond what the hazard actually requires. We're practicing it right now here in our state and in our compact. I think we're practicing it responsibly.
Any other questions for Commissioner Edwards or Mr. Carlson before we let him go? Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry, Judge, what?
Is Dave leaving?
No, but I'm going to mute him again. So,
oh, okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carlson.
6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
With that, then, we can move on to item 9, which is a chairman's report, which is going to have 2 elements to it. So let me talk about the easy one first, and then we can get to the more complicated one. We have continued to have discussions with other compacts. I was invited to sit in on a working group of the Southeast Compact a couple weeks ago, I believe, and discuss our contingency planning. And they were very interested, as have all the compacts been. We have appreciated their input. Obviously, we've appreciated the input of the low-level forum, too, that's helped us kind of organize some of that. And I think the easiest thing to say is those discussions are ongoing. Nothing concrete to report in the sense that there has been any kind of proposal made. Obviously, there was some hope that some of this could be discussed if the low-level forum meeting in October was going to occur in San Antonio, since it's in our backyard. Obviously, I don't know what the status of that is, or if it's likely to occur. But we will continue to have those discussions with them. We don't want to leave any stone unturned on our discussions with the other forums. With the other compacts and with the forum. We'll continue to try to explore what their positions are on our contingency planning and some of our other issues that are facing us. But we will continue to have those hopefully in the coming weeks and months to where we can get to something a little more concrete in determining on what they are willing to do to assist us when it comes to things like contingencies that we are charged with having a plan for. So any questions about other compact communications of the low-level forum? I know some of those people are joining us today. So in particular, I saw Dan Shrum's name. If anyone has any questions of Mr. Shrum about these issues that I can't answer, now would also be the time to ask those. So anything on those topics? Hearing none, then I will move on to the boring part of my presentation, and that is our physical matters. This always confuses me, and I am going to see if Diane Fulmer will join us. Every year, obviously, we ask for our appropriation from the legislature in bienniums, since our legislature meets every 2 years. So we ask for 2 years of budget allocations. Those are forward-looking. So the fiscal year we are about to enter on September 1, we already have our appropriation for. The governor issued a letter asking everyone who receives an appropriation to find a way to cut the previous year's and this upcoming year's budget by 5%. We did that. It was reflected in the proposed budget spreadsheet that was tab 23 in your materials, where we cut those numbers out of our budget was for the coming year. It would be in money that we have set aside for a third-party compact attorney. We have also made some other adjustments to the budget. Obviously, the budget is important, but I also understand that it may not be something that stirs your interest. So with that, I will just say our budget for the fiscal year 2021 looks pretty similar to what we have had in the past with that noted change to our compact attorney. We have also rearranged some money to try to set aside some funds for an intern or a contractor to possibly begin the process of helping us with our sunset review, which is very involved and very manpower intensive. As you will see, we have our traditional salary set aside, which I think can be used. However, our personnel and staffing issues end up shaking out. There are other line items in there that are the traditional ones, but the bottom line is that our budget went from being $577,000, but with the reduction requested by the governor, will now be approximately $548,000. I want to open it up to simply, and I asked Diane to jump on to answer any questions that anyone has about the budget. Like I said, I know these things don't always stir a lot of passion and argument, but I do want to, obviously we have to pass one, and obviously I want to answer any questions anyone has about it. So are there any questions about the proposed budget? And by the way, in case it's not completely clear, on tab 23, this is the, I'm sorry, tab 24, this is the gray column that's under budget 21. Any questions? And obviously the next step as we go into our legislative session is to ask for our new appropriation for what would be fiscal 22 and fiscal 23. Those numbers are in proposed columns on that budget. They're still subject to being changed. We will work with Diane and others as we, as the legislature gets closer to meeting and determine if we need to make any adjustments up or down, or we'll also obviously wait for guidance from the governor's office and the legislature if there is any budget limitations put on everyone who receives an appropriation. Obviously, as everybody's well aware, we are likely to face a little bit of a budget crunch this year just based on what's going on in the world and the reduction in revenues as a result of it. So we are going to try to stay nimble and make sure that we comply with whatever's requested of us, but that's still probably a work in progress. So
Brandon and Diane, do we need a motion to approve the fiscal year 21 budget?
I believe we do. Diane, that's correct, right?
Well, the 21 has really already been approved because that's already in the legislation appropriation. It's really 22 and 23 we need approval for.
So 21 though, because it's been adjusted and because it's about to be the budget that we engage in, I know that it's been approved by the legislature, but does it still need basically an approval of the commission to proceed with the coming year's budget as revised?
Well, you certainly can do that. I don't know if it's required.
And do we need to approve the 22 and 23 proposed budgets today, or is that something?
Yes. Okay. No, that has to be done today because we've got to do the LAR in the next month. So you want the board approval prior to that. Okay, then maybe I was wrong. Maybe we do need to approve 22 and 23. If you'll look, those are the two columns to the far right. And again, those numbers at the bottom, you can see some upward adjustments in 22 and 23 for normal kind of cost of living increases, but they are otherwise somewhat similar. There is in 23 also a new line item as you go down to the bottom for $40,000 that just says sunset, which would be all of the costs that we would incur in going through the sunset process, which is a build-up process, but it's technically set for fiscal year 23. Is that correct, Diane? Yes. And so we have money for staff and possibly an intern to assist us in the ramp up in 21 and 22, but then in 23, you have the $40,000 figure to actually pay for all the costs. And there's actually, we have checked on that. There's actually an actual payment that is made, I believe, to the Sunset Commission as part of that process to cover their cost. And so that's where that $40,000 comes from. Is that correct, Diane? That is correct, yes.
So, John, in answer to your question, I guess we need maybe two motions, maybe one motion to approve the proposed budget for fiscal year 21, and then a separate motion to approve the appropriation request for 22 and 23.
So I make a motion to approve the amended fiscal year 21 budget as provided in the meeting handout.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion about the motion to approve the fiscal year 21 budget as reflected on tab 24 of your packet? Hearing none, we'll move on to a vote. All in favor indicate so by saying aye.
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 All opposed, no. Motion passes. We will now entertain a motion on the approval of the proposed appropriation request for 22 and 23, fiscal year 22 and 23, as reflected in tab 24. Would anyone make a motion?
So
I
moved.
make Go ahead.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion about the proposed appropriation request reflected in tab 24 for fiscal years 22 and 23? Hearing none, we'll move on to a vote. All in favor of the motion, please indicate so by saying aye.
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 All opposed, no. Motion passes. Diane, so you know, there might have been some changes I made in the 22 and 23 numbers when I was preparing this. So you may want to review that to make sure I haven't screwed anything up on that as well.
Okay, I will.
Thank you very much, Diane, for your help. We always appreciate it.
Sure, no problem.
Thanks. With that, we are through with item 10. We can now move on to, item 9. We can now move on to item 10, which we've already started. This is tab 25 on your notebooks, commissioners. This is the draft and some proposed comments to the NRC request for comments on their very low level waste rule interpretation. I will introduce this before I turn it over to Vice Chairman Salzman by saying they've had 2 calls seeking public comment. I've listened to both. Mr. Carlson's commented on both. Dan Strom, I think, made comments in the last call. We have not made any public comments on the issue, nor to my knowledge has TCEQ. This is the formal comment letter that we will submit, which is due, I believe, by July 20th. The majority of the comments on the last 2 calls from the public was a lot of objections with the process itself, the notice that was associated with the call, and then just a general disagreement with the proposed interpretation. As has been discussed a little bit by Commissioner Edwards and Commissioner Saudak, it is a very complicated issue. They have submitted to us specific questions that they asked for our comments on, and I was also going to note, NRC actually directly reached out to us and inquired whether or not we were going to make comments, and that was the impetus really to appoint the committee to draft the letter. Was we said yes, we will, and the NRC official simply said it's very important to us. We hope you do. So I do believe that our comments are wanted, and so I think what we're going to say is going to be taken seriously, and that's a good thing, I think, because I do think we have a unique perspective on this and maybe some unique processes that we employ that obviously other compacts in other states don't, and that's what the NRC said. The NRC said, because you guys have a facility that you help regulate, it's important that we hear from you. So with that being said, let me turn it over to John and have him kind of explain the process they went through to generate this this proposed set of comments that are tab 25. I think you're muted.
So As a group, I sort of drafted up a response and sent it out to Dick and the judge. We got comments back. I got comments back. Those have been incorporated. I've read some of the draft comments that were provided by the Low Level Waste Forum as well, and they informed some of the language that we proposed. I think overall, I would summarize by saying I understand why the NRC wants to address this issue. It makes sense. It needs to be addressed. In fact, it should have been addressed many years ago. They've just, for whatever reason, chose not to. I think the biggest concern I have is the way that they've chosen to address it. I think it's poor policy in the fashion that they've chosen to try to address this issue. First of all, to use the term VLLW, but never actually define it in their proposal for some sort of rulemaking, I think is it's just bad policy. It's not sound. I truly believe if they were to push forward with this kind of process, it's going to create a huge mess. I think there will be a lot of legal means taken to try to stop it if they push forward with it. I just don't think it's the right way to do it. In the answers that we've provided in our draft comments, I think the correct approach is to use what is already a very good system, which is 10 CFR 61, and I think the comments generally reflect that. It has a way for this kind of action to be reviewed in a technically sound, defensible manner. There was much discussion, and I appreciate all the discussion that we've had today. I have fundamental problems with trying to create a rule where you could dispose of an undefined type of material in a municipal landfill. And again, the letter talks about this, but there are significant problems around the United States with probably hundreds, perhaps even thousands of municipal landfills. I would say for RCRA type, I always forget, is it type B or whatever it is, the type of RCRA facility that the WCS has permitted, and where they take a category of waste called low activity waste. I don't have a problem with that. I think it's done well. I think the TCEQ used an informed process to come to those decisions and to put in place a set of rules that are appropriate. With the process that the NRC has potentially laid out, you could have that same kind of effort, except without a defined process. And there's 37 or 38 different states that would be doing it, plus the NRC would be doing it for states that aren't agreement states. I think that's terrible policy. We don't need that many different interpretations of how this should be done in the United States. And I think potentially done in the fashion that the NRC has laid out is going to create problems for years and years that are going to have to be dealt with. This kind of thing has happened in the past. And I think this process that's laid out in their potential rule has the likelihood of ending up in that same kind of issue where for years after this goes into effect, we're going to have problems that states and the federal government are going to have to deal with. And I just don't think that's this is not the right way to deal with a problem that needs to be dealt with. So I'll shut up for a minute and let Dick and the judge talk.
Well, I want to just say that I agree with your assessment. I think it is an important question. I think it's long overdue to be addressed. But I think that the approach and the vehicle that they're trying to use to do it is inappropriate. I think it feels like it will be interpreted in a way that will undermine public confidence in the safe disposal of radioactive material. While we may have very thorough understanding of the technical hazard or the actual health hazard that's represented is different for this waste stream, this approach seems like you're trying to circumvent the rules or get around the process. It's hard to change the existing regulatory framework because it's not a publicly popular issue for any politician to take on. So that appears to me to be a motivator to try to find some wiggly way to get through the whole process without doing it the right way. But the end result is going to be an erosion of public confidence. And therefore, I think that the conclusion you've reached is the correct stance for the commission to take.
I strongly agree with both Commissioner Edwards and Commissioner Salzman's comments.
And I think the other issue that is, I think what the Vice Chairman's laid out is very important and probably the most important issue that relates to our comments. The other obvious issue is we have developed a compact system in our country. It can be argued whether or not it's effective and whether or not it's serving its purpose. But at least for us, being the Texas-Vermont Compact, we did exactly what our statute proposed. There was a site developed, and we now have an active site, and there is a public policy behind having that site, and obviously it serves an important function. And something like this could clearly have a consequence on the ability to continue to operate that site, because what time has taught us now is that the financial model for a site like that requires multiple revenue sources that include things like the RecRaCell in Andrews. And if the NRC goes out and does something that knowingly is going to undermine the financial viability or potentially undermine the financial viability of that RecRaCell and take away a revenue source that otherwise supports the compact waste facility, I think that's something that we are correct to note, and that we need to be on the record as saying, you know, our goal as a compact is to ensure that we have a viable site in Andrews County, because it's a valuable resource, not just for Texas and Vermont, but for all the other unaffiliated or states without a facility that come and dispose of their B and C level waste there. And therefore, if the NRC and or Congress wants to move forward and do something that is going to potentially impact the financial viability of all that, we at least need to go stand up and be heard on the issue of that, and make sure that it's noted. If they choose to move forward and do it anyway, obviously we can't stop them, but I do think it's something that's important that we put in our 2 cents about, and make sure that they understand that based on what we understand of the operation in Andrews, that this could have a very negative effect on the ability to continue to operate the compact waste facility. And I think that's laid out well in the proposed letter. And so I'm not trying to add anything to it, but I do think that those are the 2 major issues is the actual nuts and bolts process laid out by the NRC that I think obviously everyone has pointed out has some real issues, but then this potentially unintended consequence of having a negative financial impact on the facility that our compact helps.
Raise one other question. Looking at this and thinking about it, it seems like this would require some additional rulemaking by OSHA to change their workplace safety standards for the landfill workers and transportation workers, or at least potentially require change. Have they done any consideration of those changes in OSHA standards?
My suspicion is they haven't considered it at all, but I think you're correct. This rule could potentially create a need for rulemaking at OSHA, maybe even EPA too. It's sort of unclear at this point.
Have we shown this letter to TCEQ and invited them to comment? Do we have alignment between the commission and TCEQ if the comments are acceptable to.
We have shared it with them, and I'm assuming that TCEQ will be providing their own comments, but let me see who from the TCEQ might like to respond to that inquiry. Is there Ashley? Would you like to be the one? I see Ashley has asked. So Ashley, did I click on you or did I click on somebody else? Hold on. Sorry.
Bobby's.
Then I will start with Commissioner Janeka.
That's a good start.
Hi there, Bobby Janeka. For the record, yeah, calling in, speaking for TCEQ. Thank y'all so much, and I will defer to Ashley if she can work out her mic difficulties, but I believe our agency is working on comments for this proposal as well, and it will go through the typical executive review. So I don't want to speak out of turn. My fellow commissioners will each have a chance to review as well, but ultimately that's the decision our executive director will finalize and send off. I believe that many of your comments and concerns that you've raised are very much in alignment with the potential issues and concerns we had as a regulatory agency. The only thing that I would add on to a lot of the great discussion that has occurred so far is Commissioner Sodick, just to address your concern about the prospect of landfills across the country. I think that's a very meaningful and sincere potential concern. Our colleagues at the Texas Department of State Health Services could probably speak directly to how often they hear from landfill operators where there will be portal alarms or monitors that trigger on otherwise routine and non-radioactive waste shipments where they want to raise the flag and investigate. I think there is a bit of an overabundance of caution that many operators of landfills, municipal or otherwise, in the state of Texas practice. And so hopefully that gives you some concern that from what I've seen, that liability and the tail end of that compliance process, where the landfill operators often know and the waste generators often know that they could be pulled in if there is an inappropriate disposal that occurs in landfills under state regulation. That process does seem to be meaningful and happen frequently, just from my recollection of the many number of false alarms where the waste shipment may have been perfectly acceptable to go into the alarm, but for whatever reason there is some nascent radioactivity present in that shipment that more often than not that resolves in this was not an issue, but that is still very much a live concern, and so I don't want to dismiss it, but just assure you that happens today and certainly would continue to be an issue regardless of how the NRC proceeds on this matter.
Well, I would have no doubt that the bureaucracy that regulates this in every state would grow, which I suppose some people would feel is a good thing and others might not.
Well, that goes exactly to one comment that I've reviewed the draft, at least, where our agency is observing that potential concern, where if the state agency is not necessarily explicitly on the hook for oversight of this process, I think we would feel a large implicit role to, if there were municipal landfills that obtain this authorization, would they then need to be treated from the state or federal oversight perspective as an unofficial radioactive waste disposal site, where that total lifetime disposal would need to be tracked and accounted for just for the public's awareness and addressing those concerns. So that would potentially raise and place unfunded mandates or unfunded burdens on state or local enforcement, certainly.
Commissioner Janeka, my concern is, I just hope that if there is a conflict between any point that this commission is making versus TECQ, that we have an opportunity to get alignment on that and between the two agencies before we each send in our separate letters. I don't mind if, it doesn't bother me if we make different points, just as long as they're not conflicting. I think we should not conflict with each other.
Thank you, Commissioner Edwards. I think that's a point very well taken. And what I will commit to do is try to quickly review and discuss these draft comments that y'all have provided for public review here, and just make sure that we've taken a quick comparison and ensure that there aren't any concerns in terms of a potential conflict in message coming from both of our institutions. I think I agree with you. We have perhaps different areas of concern that we need to address and speak to, but I share your desire to make sure that we're not contradictory in any way, shape, or form. So I appreciate that very much, and I share that view, and we'll certainly commit to try to circle back if there are any apparent potential areas of disconnect. And I'm not aware of any. I haven't seen any to date, and I'm pretty pleased with the level of detail of these draft comments that y'all are circulating. I appreciate the seriousness with which y'all are approaching trying to evaluate and provide comment to the NRC. Hopefully they find it helpful as well. So just thank y'all for the chance to weigh in.
Thank you, Commissioner Janeka. One of the things I forgot to mention is obviously there's some comments in this letter that may spur us to questions of our attorney and seek legal advice. So if anyone believes we need to do that, obviously that is a reason to go into executive session. So I want to make that option available to everyone as well. If anyone has questions that they'd like to ask of Dave Gordon about any of the comments or issues raised in the letter, the two letters you see are what John's committee initially did, and then a set of changes in issues that I raised. And so in light of the discussion we just had with Commissioner Janeka, I will open the floor to discussion on this, but I think maybe what we need is a motion that basically says, subject to revisions to ensure some sort of agreement between what we put out and what the TCEQ puts out, that the letters, both original and as amended, are approved for submission to the NRC as a comment of this commission. Now, if we want to have discussion about any of the actual comments made or any of the changes proposed, now would obviously be the time to do that. And again, if it falls into seeking legal advice, we can go into an executive session. But I think that is the path that we should probably be headed down. So I will open the floor again to any specific questions or comments about the drafts as they currently stand.
My only comment would be, I hope we get it out and then get it out, fairly soon, so that it doesn't, it's not kind of the last pile of letters that they get.
Yes, and today's the 9th, and it's due, I think the comments are due on the 20th, but obviously, once we hear back from Commissioner Janeka and others at the TCEQ, I think we can get it out relatively quickly. And as you all might recall, we went through a comment process before with the TCEQ, with the NRC, where we did submit comments, and it's an electronic process, and then they're all become publicly available. And so the process is, the good news is that it's instantaneous, and then you can see all of the comments there. And so it will be, I think, similar to that, in that once we're ready to go, it can happen on a moment's notice. Any other comments?
Yeah, I'd like to make one.
Go ahead, Judge.
So I'm kind of taking in for Andrews because WCS is here and all that stuff. But Commissioner Janeka's got two prongs. One, he operates the solid waste facilities in state and operates the low radioactivity division, but the health department has all the other stuff. So I think it's got brought out and probably going to be in his letter more than ours, but the backlegging this stuff into landfills has always gone on and will go on forever probably. But I don't know how you stop that. Our landfill does not have the resources to have a monitor set up. These bigger landfills like Fort Worth or the larger cities do have that stuff set up. But you got all these little landfills, kind of like what Dick was saying with the apple pie lady. I'm not going to say ours is that way at all, but you got the mom and pops and you got the little cities doing that. So, but my main thing is that this letter pretty well speaks for us. And I really like what it says, that Congress needs to take this up and change 61 to include this if they're going to do this. The part of the NRC going the back door of this and just making rulemaking is not the way government needs to operate, especially this type of government. And that's my comment.
Thank you, Judge. Any other comments? So David Gordon, let me ask you, can we put forth a motion that just says subject to revisions and deletions that the commission is approving the submission of the comment?
Yeah, I think one of the ways that we could handle this is for the commission to approve one of the versions of the letter that has been distributed in materials, and then the commission would then authorize the committee to make revisions and changes to be consistent with any TCEQ remarks.
Could we also do it with the chair could make those?
Yeah, if the chair wants to participate, I think that can be, yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Brandon, would you like me to make a motion?
Well, before we do that, maybe we should also open it up, at least momentarily, for any other public comment, because I realize this is a matter of public concern, and I want to give everybody a chance to provide us their public comments on the chance that it may influence what we want to do. So I will open it up for a moment to see if anyone who's in the public audience has a desire to make a comment on this. Okay, seeing none, I guess we can move on then, John, to a motion.
So I make a motion to approve the red line version of the letter that's contained within our packet, subject to additions, deletions, based on comments that we received from TCEQ or others, and would ask that the final version be reviewed and by both the committee and Brandon prior to submission to the NRC.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion about the redlined comment letter in your packet in tab 25 that we plan to submit to the NRC? Hearing none, we move on to a vote. Everybody in favor of the motion, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you all very much. I think this is an important issue, and we appreciate TCEQ helping us with these issues, and we will be sure that we stay in step with them if for no other reason than we don't want to contradict anything each other says. So we will continue to work with them as we move forward before we submit it. And to Commissioner Sadek's point, we will try to get this out as soon as possible over the next several days. With that, we can now move on to item 11, which is a discussion of possible action on the contingency plan described in section 3.04 of our compact. Before I turn it over to Commissioner Mundy, let me say the four people that have been working on this, including Commissioner Mundy, Commissioner Bradford, and Commissioner Morris, and myself, have really done yeoman's work. We have met by phone once a week and gone all the way around the world with this. There's been an enormous amount of effort put into it, and that's true of everyone. It has been something that has been arduous, I guess would be the right word. We have worked very hard. I don't know that we're done yet by any means, but I want to commend everybody for all the work they put in. And I think this is an important issue and one that's clearly been put on our plate by our statute. So it's important that we address it. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Mundy to kind of update us on where we are with our contingency planning.
Certainly. And we lost the judge. I don't know. You want to take a 5-minute break? Since
we can proceed. When he gets back, we'll catch him up.
Sure. As Brandon said, we've met every week, typically for 2 to 3 hours. And when we started off, we had all kind of creative ideas, and as we'll go through here in a minute, slowly but surely whittled them down. But the first point I would like to make is emphasize that this exercise is a statutory mandate to have a contingency plan. There was a previous attempt at it, which generated a paper, which mostly generated a lot of questions, but no real pragmatic conclusions. So the committee was trying to focus on pragmatic, what would really happen and what kind of scenarios. And I want to emphasize that the WCS, the current operator, by everything we hear, is doing a great job. This is in no way reflective of them, what they're doing, how they're doing it, anything about that. This is truly us doing our homework as good citizens and stewards of this facility to make sure something's in place, as well as meet the statutory mandate. As we all observed, our work started right as the COVID lockdown orders began, which really added some context for the importance of dealing with unforeseen events. One of the very first ideas we had about a contingency plan was, well, let's just see if we can reach out to the other compacts and see what they've done for contingency plans and copy that, and perhaps work out a agreement where everybody will backstop each other. So if one compact goes down for whatever reason it may be, the other one would pick up the slack on an interim basis. What we discovered in that, chasing down that idea, was that none of the compacts have any current contingency plans, which was slightly disturbing just as a citizen. So none of them have a contingency plan right now. Moreover, none of them are particularly interested in backstopping each other. There's a lot of politics, needless to say, and changing who accepts what waste from where. If there was going to be some effort to make that a reality of where the various compact facilities backstop each other, realistically, that would take Congress intervening to amend the organic statutes that create the compacts. So that was ideal one, and where it ended up, that's going to require congressional amendments to the organic statutes. And I should add that Brandon suggested fairly strongly that we not generate a report before today's meeting. He didn't want it to bog down on specifics, because we really are looking for input from the other commissioners or feedback, and we will generate one after this. But so these are just kind of letting you know the high points of what we've done to explore ideas. The next major idea, which had lots of variations of how it would occur, all entail somehow the state steps in and runs it either permanently or on a temporary basis, or reverts to one of the prior low-level commissions operating it. The practical problem there is, as we've already heard, the budget on the horizon is cutting back expenditures, walking in the door saying we need potentially tens of millions earmarked to run this facility is just frankly a political non-starter. So anything that requires public revenue sources to operate at either part-time, interim, whatever it may be, if it required public funding, the answer was fairly firmly that was a non-starter. So that foreclosed that category of solutions. The next high point, and really one of the most important ones, is you received last night, we had coordinated with one meeting with TCEQ personnel, and thanks to Commissioner Janeka for volunteering them. And then we sent also some written questions, which resulted in the response that you received last night with some, again, what we thought were practical ideas or questions about how you could really work on a contingent operation. The most important bottom line is TCEQ felt that they could not operate the facility temporarily due to manpower issues, legal conflict of interest problems, ethics problems, and budgetary problems. So bottom line, real world, they did not feel like they could step in to operate it at all in whatever scenario might occur. So that sort of shuts down that avenue.
Are we taking questions now or waiting till the end?
Wait till the end. You'll see there's a whole list of things, and then the other commissioners will weigh in, and then we'll brainstorm it.
Okay, Jeff.
It'll be short. It'll be real short here. The next thing that's a major issue to keep in mind is there's a fund and some bonds that exist to fund the closure of the facility. But those bonds, as we understand it, do not in any way allow for their expenditure for continuation of operations. So any sort of decision about a continuation of operations has to keep in mind that it potentially could jeopardize those closure funding mechanisms, the bonds, and that's something to keep really on the front burner. So if it's going to head to closure, the bonds are there to cover that. But if we do something on an interim basis, it's got to make sure there's an alternate source ultimately to cover closure. That kind of led us, like I said, we've explored many different ideas under each one of those major categories. That led us to the conclusion that if something were to happen today or in the near term, realistically, we would probably be heading towards a closure of the facility. And I'll encourage Commissioner Morris to speak in a few minutes about what that entails. But the short of it is that if a closure occurs, that it should be viewed as a permanent closure. It's not something where you could go put a lid on it, come back in a year or two and flip the switch and start it back up. And she can speak to that. So what do we do if we go that route? And this speaks to why the chairman moved the two export considerations is, to after this dialogue, because we're talking about these scenarios. So if we go that route, end up in a closure scenario, realistically, this commission would be in a position where we just start handing out a big stack of export permits. And Clive is set up to accept A, so that leaves what do you do with B and C? We had a fair amount of discussion, and again, Commissioner Morris can speak to this. She's done some excellent homework on this. The power plants have, according to Commissioner Morris, have done a good job of reducing the volume of their B and C waste. Could they store it on site? And she can speak to this, potentially up to 2 years legally. Physically, how much space they have is unknown to us, but that's a potential. However, there's this small group of what I call medical and academic and other waste that, I always worry about kind of getting lost in our dialogue. The big power plants sort of the gorillas in the room, but what about these little medical generators particularly? To me, the nightmare scenario is we turn on the news at night, head MD Anderson's on there saying we have to curtail treatments with our programs because we have no place to dispose of the waste generated. And Linda can speak. She's identified one particular medical waste stream that I believe she says class B that would have to be considered how that gets dealt with. I'll let her speak to that. The last point before I'll hand it off is there are considerations depending on if something were to happen is what legal obligations would the state of Texas have to Vermont to deal with what is essentially the dismantling of Vermont Yankee if an event occurred before Vermont Yankee is totally decommissioned and moved. We have a request pending with the AG's office for a series of legal questions that get at what the legal obligations are of the state of Texas to Vermont. We do not have answers to that right now, and hopefully we'll get that soon, and that will drive some of its own dialogue. So with that, I'll hand it off to the other commissioners. Commissioner Morris, you may want to go next and talk a little bit about that medical stream that might be the orphan out there that needs some thought and consideration.
Sure. First of all, I keep dropping in and out. There's road construction near me and they're moving cables, so it's been kind of crazy. But there are several significant generators at BNC that are not nuclear power generators. And so you think automatically of the industrial gauge users, oil and gas industry, as well as like the industrial radiators used for sterilization of things. But then Commissioner Monday mentions the medical community. And we've heard a lot in recent years about devices such as medical radiators used for these are typically hundreds of curies of radioactive material. There is a program active right now, the Off-Site Source Recovery Program managed by Los Alamos, that will take devices containing 600 curies or more into their program, but they're backlogged. And of course, we never know about federal funding right now, whether funding will continue to be available to do that. There are also medical radiators used for blood irradiation, as well as radiation therapy sources used internally. And so these are all types of sources that would be B and C waste and might not have a disposal pathway if the compact waste facility is not open. So those were our concerns. Did you want me to speak about?
Why don't you talk about the closure and
Okay. Well, we tossed around how difficult is it to close a facility, a low-level waste facility such as our compact waste facility. And if someone wanted to come in later and reopen that facility, how difficult will that be? Essentially looking into this, I received some really good information from the TCEQ folks. Essentially, it appears that once the facility is closed, any new operator new licensee would have to completely start over from scratch. I believe that we have 8 or 9 phases for our compact waste facility. We're currently in phase 1, getting up there and stuff. I would imagine in the not too distant future, the operator will be contacting TCEQ to see about moving into a phase 2 construction. So when phase 1 cell is closed out, there'll be a temporary cap placed on it, not a permanent cap, but a temporary cap. So the whole process is quite involved. And if for any reason the closure happens, it would be essentially, in my mind, and there are others here that participants at this meeting today that could offer more information on this topic, that essentially it'd be like starting over again with a new licensee, new operator, new facility. With that, I'll open it up. There may be folks, again, that we invite your comments on this, but we put a lot of work into this, and right now it looks like the only funding available is, as Commissioner Monday suggested, is the closure funds. So,
Peter or Brandon, do y'all have anything you'd like to add before we?
I would only add that this is probably the no-brainer portion of it, but obviously any contingency plan we would develop would also, as kind of an initial matter, what we would do as a commission is we would send out notice to anyone who has an active agreement with us that agreement would be suspended. We'd put out notice that anyone who was in the process of shipping waste would need to stop those shipments, because once there was a shutdown of the facility, obviously no waste could be accepted anymore unless we coordinated with the TCEQ. but those are kind of the nuts and bolts of what we would do as an immediate issue in the event of some sort of contingent event that caused the cessation of operations at the facility. Those are obviously no-brainers, and I think everybody assumes we do them, but I want to make sure that everyone knows that we understand that would be probably our first step. And then a lot of the things that we've talked about with Commissioner Mundy and Commissioner Morris are probably, secondary steps that we would take once we kind of got a feeling of what was going on and how it could potentially be addressed. But I will say, when I started on this issue, I think 3 or 4 years ago, I labored under the presumption that the site in Andrews County is an incredibly valuable asset, and that if at all possible, we should find a way as part of our contingency plan to continue its operation. And I will say, we have left no stone unturned in trying to find a way to do that. And I think we'll continue to look, but I really do think that our conclusions at this point are well-founded based on everything and everyone we've talked to.
Peter, you have anything to add?
Jeff, I don't need to say much. I think at this point you've already stated the Vermont interest in being sure that the facility remains able to take the Vermont Yankee waste. We've looked a bit at the status of the Vermont Yankee decommissioning, and we'll get more on that. But I will be very interested in the Attorney General's response to the request for his views on the legalities of the Texas obligation to Vermont in the event of a closure, which we would certainly prefer not happen.
Yes. Brandon, you want to open it up to?
Yeah, I was going to say, so first let me open it up to the commissioners for any questions before we go to public comment. Is there any questions or comments that any of the other commissioners have about our contingency planning to date?
I have a few questions. So I agree, if the site were to close, there's some immediate actions related to notification to suspend shipments. Do we have a mechanism to know what, to have immediate communication with folks, or very short turnaround communication with folks that may be shipping waste because they have an active approved permit?
We actually talked about that, and we discussed maybe putting a new line on our application that simply says the person to communicate with. It's more or less already there because someone signs it, and usually it's the RSO or someone like that at each generator. And as part of that signature, I believe we have their contact information. I do think what we can do is create some sort of last email subset list that we send out, and then ask for them to acknowledge it, and then if not, then we contact them via phone.
I think that this information already exists, and if we can develop some coordination with TCEQ, probably already there on any manifested shipment, which would mean it's en route. They have to provide a 24-hour emergency contract. It's a requirement. I suspect, not positive, that these manifests are sent in advance to either TCEQ or to WCS when the shipment is offered for transportation, so that there's knowledge that this shipment is approaching the facility or destined for the facility in a short amount of time. There's the contact information. We just have to have access to the manifested shipments. Somebody in Texas has those, and I suspect it's TCEQ or WCS.
Yes, we actually looked at that, and the TCEQ does. We kind of want to generate our own immediate contact list. In a situation like this, time is of the essence. So we would like just a simple addition to our petition application form might be able to provide us similar information that we have in our hands.
Okay, that's a reasonable approach. What that'll mean, though, is anyone who has an approved permit is subject to us, we'd have to do a contact with them, when in fact there's probably a very limited number that are actually on the road at for the real short turnaround time. But that's, I don't think it's a huge population. I'm kind of curious to understand why we think this commission has the standing to determine whether a closure is permanent or not. That feels to me like it's a licensing question and not a, I think clearly if the facility closes, we have actions that need to take relative to that closure. And if and when it reopens, then we would have actions to take relative to that reopening and amending of new waste. But I don't understand where our standing would come from to say, well, now that it's closed, it's a permanent closure.
Lisa, Linda can talk to it, but it wasn't a legal issue. I think it was Linda's understanding that it's a true, just physical construction question. The closure methodology is such that once it's closed up, it physically could not be reopened. Linda, can you address that?
Well, yeah, there are the two sides of it. There's the administrative side, the legal side, the attorney generals, all the debt, the council, just all sorts of people involved. So there's that of it. But then there's the actual physical closure aspects. And that's really what I was more addressing was the physical. Now, the TCEQ had some good information in their responses to our questions, where they would decide whether the licensee has, are they going to end up terminating the license or what exactly. So I kind of agree. We're not really in a position to decide whether there should be a permanent closure or anything else. That's not our thing that we would be doing. But that decision would be made by others, and then we would have to be responding to that.
I was just a little concerned about the language that it sounded to me a little bit like we were making a statement that if it closes ever, because I could imagine scenarios.
Not for us to decide, I don't think.
Yeah, good. So, I mean, it's a pretty big investment, but I can imagine scenarios where there's a temporary closure. Let's say there's a tornado that
Sure.
impacts the site in some way or some other kind of weather event that isn't
not permanent.
Yeah, that there's something that needs to be done to address or remedy any damage to the site prior to resuming operations. So it's a temporary closure, but not a permanent one.
Right.
Versus, well, even if a licensee were to walk away or there was some financial instability present during some period of time, which caused the closure of the facility, that doesn't mean the facility itself is no longer licensed. Well, kind of probably a licensee action in there. Anyway, it doesn't rest with us to do that.
No, it does not.
Okay, and then the third thing is I mean, this is just a comment, and Peter and Dick, our Commissioner Bradford and Commissioner Sauter, you might not like this comment, but there's a certain, clearly the district attorney and attorney general, the legal folks in Texas have to, weigh into this, and probably in Vermont too. But it seems to me that there are a number of compact commissions where states have committed significant amounts of money with the hope of siting and building a disposal site. And largely with every place except for the Texas-Vermont Compact, that money has not brought about the fruition or resulted in a disposal site being made even available to them. In this case, we've gotten much further in the process. We actually sited one, we built a disposal site, and it has been available for a significant period of time and hopefully for much longer. But there's risk that both Texas and I think all compact members have when they join a compact. There's no guarantee in my mind that a disposal site will actually be sited. It's the hope and the intention. But we have many examples where it does not result in even one being sited, much less built. So if the site were to close, I would be really interested in the legal opinion, I think we all are, that would result in Texas somehow owing something to Vermont. It would seem to me that the monies that are paid were a good faith investment and a good faith effort has been made. And the citizens of Texas are just as subject and impacted to a closure as this facility as Vermont would be as a compact member. Just my 2 cents. It's not legal at all, but
you know, if you're talking about getting in, if you're talking about getting into a legal question, you know, what's been going through my mind is I don't know, but possibly, I mean, obviously we're going to find the best litigator to go against you guys, and that would be Brandon. So
no offense, Dave.
But well, he'll be defending he'll be on the other side. So yeah, this will be fun for lawyers. But I don't know, Peter, what
You're on mute, Peter.
You're muted. You're muted. Peter.
Yeah, let's just agree that the risks are allocated by the compact, and we won't be deciding them this morning. There are, in fact, the Texas plants as well as the Vermont plants that will still need a place to put their B and C waste, and that will look to the compact, among other things, as this to decide what that will be. To me, the important thing is to avoid the contingency, and that's really where I think our long-term focus and Texas's long-term focus too are gonna lie. We just don't want that facility closing.
We need to make this successful and workable.
You know, when some of the utilities, I think, or some of the operators of these plants begin to talk about, number one, they are asking for an export permit to take it to Utah. Now, you know, they're saying, well, no, we'll continue at WCS, but if we needed a contingency, we'd take it to Utah. And then number two, the NRC comes out and says, let's open landfills. I begin to wonder whether people know something I don't know. I mean, is there, I don't know how to put this exactly, but it concerns me if there are, you know, if buzzards are circling here, if there is some problem that people assume is taking place, that they're going to have to meet, that somehow WCS might close or what. Is any of this imply that people are shaky about this, about whether WCS will be available for at least the half-life of some of these isotopes?
I will say this, and obviously Dave Carlson and others are on the line as well. Everything I've been told at this point is that WCS has every intention of continuing to operate, and there is no threat of closure at this point. I don't know what motivates things like the NRC rule, and we're about to obviously get to the export request, but I don't know that there's anything specific to point to that may be the impetus for some of these things, other than just general uncertainty about the future. But like I said, what we've been told by WCS and others is that there is no indication in their mind that they're on the verge of closing, or that anything's drastic about to happen. As Jeff mentioned at the very beginning, it's unfortunate that we have this obligation, because I think it creates a false impression in people's minds that we think there's about to be something happening with WCS, when in fact that's not the case at all. This is just a statutory obligation we have, and so we have to assume that at some point there's a contingent event and then draft a plan around it. But in no way should it suggest that we think that there is something looming on the horizon. So what other people are doing, I obviously can't speak to that, but I want to make sure that, to reiterate what Jeff has said, which is, nothing about what we're doing as a contingency planning committee in any way is a statement on what we think the immediate future holds with WCS and the facility out there. But I noticed Dave Carlson raised his hand, so I want to make sure he gets the opportunity to speak to this issue as well. So Dave, do you have comments?
Yeah, absolutely. Can you hear me, Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah, first off, I do appreciate the work of the subcommittee to meet the statutory mandate to complete this, understand the reason for that, and that that has to be done per statute. But I am pleased to state that we do not anticipate that the contingency plan will ever need to be implemented. And let me go one step farther than that and say we're ready if other facilities around the country that may or may not have their own financial issues, if they were to cease operations or to close, we would be ready to take on that as well. So I think we are an important facility for the country, and people should not draw any conclusions from the fact that we do need to complete this contingency plan due to the statutory mandate.
Any other comments or questions from commissioners? Well, we have Dave on the line too. Is there any questions related to contingency planning we need to ask him? Okay, thank you, Mr. Carlson, again. Let me bridge this now to going back to item 7. What Commissioner Mundy said at the very outset is part of what we have discussed is in the event of a closure, should part of our contingency planning be kind of a blanket export authorization, because our statute does require us to authorize exports from our compact to be sent to anywhere outside our compact. Our understanding, and based on the cover letters that came with the 2 export petitions pending before us from Comanche Peak and South Texas project, is that their requests this year are solely based on that potential contingency, that they believe they need some sort of export authority in the event of a closure to kind of bridge the gap until they can get back before us and seek a larger export authorization. But the amounts that they have requested and the volumes and the queries they have requested would basically allow them to kind of live in that interim period after a closure before a meeting could be heard. I think the question that our committee was trying to address, I'll let Commissioner Mundy speak to this, is should we proactively address this as a commission, and part of our contingency plan simply be that we have a contingent export authorization that upon the declaration, whoever's legally authorized to do that, of a closure, whether it be temporary or permanent, that it then triggers this export authorization that is effectively a blanket that says anyone who generates waste within the states of Vermont or Texas has the authority to export that waste to another facility really of their choosing, and have that be effective until further notice? Or do we want to follow a process that now appears to be starting with Comanche Peak in South Texas, to where they come forward and ask for a contingent export authorization on an individual basis every year? So with that, I will turn it back over to Commissioner Mundy and let him speak to this issue as well. But I think that's the reason we have moved the items in number 7 to after this discussion. So Jeff, I'll let you speak to this as well.
Sure. I would say, to me, we can meet, if an emergency occurs, we can meet with 72 hours advance notice under the Open Meetings Act. And then there's a subpart within that, then in the event of certain things characterized as an emergency, we can meet within hours if need be. Exports, it's hard for me to envision a scenario. I'm not the technical person. I'll let Lisa and Linda and others weigh in, but it's hard to envision a scenario where somebody would have to export with less than 72 hours of advanced planning. If something were going wrong at the facility, I would hope that we would have it brought to us immediately for whatever the reason. It's not just walking away, throwing the keys in the dirt, but you know, a security breach, a terrorist attack, a weather event. And I'm from the Panhandle. Lord knows tornadoes occur out there. So, but I would like to see it where if something happens to that facility, Mr. Carlson's calling Brandon or whoever he can reach saying, hey, the facility's shut down for whatever the reason is, and give us some guidance. Is it a day, a week, a month, a year? And coordinate with the TCEQ and let us assess what needs to happen at that point. There, as we're kind of talking here, there's a whole litany of contingencies between running normally and shutting down and closing. There could be all kinds of shades of gray in the middle. So my general preference would be we have a policy and let the public know that if it's shut down and somebody has a waste stream backed up and they need to move it, that there's essentially conditional approval and policy of this commission that we're going to allow export. And I think honestly, we can just say you can export whatever you want. It's not up to us. It's more on the receiving end to figure out what they could receive. So say that's our general policy, but then come to us first and say, let's use STP saying we can't send a load to the Andrews facility for whatever reason. I would rather us get some advance notice and have us make the decision about whether that contingent event is occurring. I think it goes back to Smitty Smith made a comment several meetings ago about defining what is a contingent event. Is it if the gates are closed and they can't take a load? Is it a 1 day shutdown? Is it a 1 month shutdown? So I would like to see the commission retain some authority and discretion over deciding when those contingent events are such that we're going to allow exports, especially from our big power plants. But honestly, as a policy, I would say anybody, it may be harder for, like, say, a hospital to sit on even a small amount. So those are just some general thoughts.
I have opened up the line for Eddie Seelig and Dick Adams because I want to make sure that we hear from our in-compact power plant. So let me open it up to comments. We can start with Eddie and see what he has to say about this, and then we'll move on to Dick.
Well, I know that there are representatives from Comanche Peak and South Texas Project who are attending the meeting, and perhaps they can speak directly to the waste volumes that they want to have in their export petitions. But I believe that the rationale behind these export petitions is to have a petition, to have an export petition in hand so that there won't be any kind of lapse and no crisis for the commission. I know that Dick Adams might want to have some additional things to say.
All right, thank you, Eddie. Dick, we'll turn it over to you now.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, Richard Adams on behalf of Comanche Peak. I don't know why we would have an issue with what Commissioner Mundy had mentioned about sort of a blanket export authorization in case of a closure. I can't think of why we would have a problem with that. I think that's a question separate and apart, though, from the current export petitions that we have pending. I think those stand or fall on their own merits and hopefully stand on their own merits. I hope that answers your question, Mr. Chairman.
And I will say this, in light of the fact that we don't have a ready-made solution, and this is still in the discussion phase, obviously we're about to begin a new disposal year. That's the reason the export petition or request for export authorizations are before us. And so the question is, do we approve the export requests that are before us now, understanding that they are, limited to the circumstances described in their cover letters? And then we work on this contingent plan that will have some sort of blanket export authorization that is yet to be finalized. And what we say is these export authorizations that are specific to Comanche Peak and South Texas are effective until we replace them with whatever our contingent blanket export authorizations will be if and when we do that in the future.
This is Dick Adams again. I would urge you to act on the Comanche Peak export permission petition separate and apart from what you do with regard to a action on the contingency plan. To me, they're separate issues.
And Greg Wood has raised his hand. And Greg, I think you're still muted, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to speak as well.
Yes, this is Greg Wood at Comanche Peak. Like Dick was saying, I think we would encourage you to look at the two issues as being separate, like Dick was saying, because as far as the export permit goes, the volume and the carry content we're asking for is very low, and it's just a contingency that allows us a little flexibility to act if needed due to some unforeseen circumstance that we could be challenged with. So that's really the basis behind of what we're trying to do.
Greg, could you share with the group a little bit about single point vulnerabilities and the kind of contingency planning that you're being asked to do to avoid single point vulnerabilities?
Sure, Commissioner Edwards, absolutely. So, nuclear power plants, we like to have redundant systems for different safety functions. Well, that also goes with just about all aspects of our business. And that includes the waste we want to send off. Having one disposal site is that we can count on is good, but having an alternative to use just in case some unforeseen circumstance comes up is better. That if we only have one, that puts us into a single point vulnerability with that one facility. Should some circumstance arise that we're not planned for, it can put us in a tight spot.
Any other questions of Greg? In particular about the Comanche Peak export request?
We have frequently allowed kind of blank checks in terms of long-term, like a whole year and big amounts so that shippers have a lot of flexibility and so on. But I still don't understand. It seems to me kind of fundamental to our purpose that this business of export permits just a kind of a blank check on export permits. It troubles me. It's as if we're saying, well, you're right. You might something might happen, so you can't go to WCS, and so we'll just write you a blank check on this, and you can decide when something happens that you don't want to send it to WCS. Now, I realize that they're saying that they will send it to WCS, but what is the big deal here? I mean, why can't they come in if they've got a problem, or if WCS has a problem? Do they have to turn on a dime? Is that the problem? Do these shippers have to have this available on virtually no notice because of the way they ship? The waste is on the way out and they're gonna have to divert their trucks or something. I just don't quite understand this.
I don't think that they considered an emergency meeting. In the discussions that I've had with them, it was more based upon we have a meeting every 2 or 3 months and not wanting to hold waste for that length of time. I guess I would ask the representatives from Comanche Peak and South Texas project that given what was stated earlier about our ability to meet within really a very short period of time for emergency situations, which I think the closure of the compact facility would constitute an emergency. Does that sort of obviate the need for this export request?
Well, if I might, as well, it just seems to me that, you know, I mean, if all of a sudden the word comes back to us that WCS is closed or closing or something, my guess is we're going to pick up the pace on meetings, or at least have one in a hurry. It just only makes sense.
And before we get the utilities to respond to this, it may be important to put in context what they're asking for. And so it's only the exportation of Class A waste. And for Comanche Peak, it's 5,000 cubic feet with 1 curie of activity. And then with South Texas, it is 1,000 cubic feet with 0.75 curies. So again, these are, and again, Class A. So these are small requests, and they're only for Class A that I'm assuming, and again, this can be part of whatever STP and Comanche Peak tell us, I'm assuming would otherwise go into the RCRA facility in Andrews. So with that, I will shut up and let somebody from Comanche Peak in South Texas speak to the things that have been asked.
Yes, this is Greg Wood at Comanche Peak, and Chairman Hurley, you're correct. You know, we basically asked for that 5,000 cubic feet and 1 curie for our low-level Class A, primarily DAW. It gives us the ability to move a couple of trucks if needed. Buy us some time. We can. You talked about emergency meetings, but it allows us some time to get those meetings scheduled just in case another export permit was needed in that case. Now, you also talked about the turnaround time of something where an emergency meeting was called, and you said, I heard 72-hour time frame being used. But it really doesn't address the fact that if we had a truck that was scheduled to come on site or was already there, and for some reason we got notified that we weren't able to send the waste off to WCS, we would incur a financial cost associated with that truck of not being able to send our waste off, and we don't know what type of how long it would take to resolve the issue itself. But with a permit available to us, we would have an alternative that we could use in that circumstance as well.
And Greg, am I accurate in saying that this is waste that would otherwise go to the RCRA facility?
Yes, you're correct, Chairman Hurley.
Well, as long as, you know, I mean, it sounds de minimis. If it's not a slippery slope, that may be okay. I just, you know, it kind of troubles me that our very reason for being here is to have the waste delivered in this place, and then okay, I mean, yeah, you have to hold a truck. I don't know, that may be a major cost to you, but it does, as I say, is this, maybe I ought to ask you folks, are you thinking of this as becoming a kind of a more routine request to get a kind of a blank check on export if you need to?
You mean that they would come before us every year with a similar request?
Well, yeah, but for maybe a little more waste, kind of, or something. I mean, when you say, well, okay, the volume is negligible, the radioactivity is negligible, so what's the problem? I guess the problem is just whether this is kind of the foot in the door, and then we're going to be expected to basically leave it up to the companies as to whether they can ship or not. I can just imagine all different kinds of scenarios. You know, WCS closes, they say we're closing for a day. The companies say, oh gee, you know, we know it's cheaper to ship to so-and-so, and we don't want to keep our truckers waiting for a day or something.
If you're kind of getting I would suggest at a minimum a condition on the permits that says they're authorized only if WCS is either physically unable to receive the load or unwilling for some reason to receive the load. Then the question is, who's the arbiter of that? And that's where I would prefer that it come back to either the chairman or the contingency committee or call an emergency meeting. But as you're getting at, there's a big difference if they shut down due to a tornado and they're closed for 3 months, or they walk away versus they're taking like holiday or something. So I would, because they are contingent event permits, I would say that ought to be very expressly a condition on the permit, only if WCS cannot accept it physically or is unwilling, but then at least have it come back to Brandon to make the decision that, okay, that contingency is occurred. You know, the Smitty Smith question of what triggers a contingency. I would prefer that decision to reside in the commission or a subset of it.
Commissioner Edwards, I saw that you wanted to make a comment.
Yeah, I guess the way I process this, I think all the challenges to any blanket requests for export are appropriate. I am not at all in favor of blanket export permits for waste out of the compact in general. In this case, what is being proposed is a contingency export permit for a small volume and small activity of waste that just eliminates and addresses some of the cultural needs at a nuclear power plant to eliminate single point vulnerabilities. The fact that we consider it appropriate to put in our contingency plan this very thing, an immediate export approval for waste generated in the state of Texas upon the closure of WCS. And, you know, clearly we can argue about what closure means or have put some effort into defining that. But we're talking as a group that this would be appropriate thing to put in the contingency plan. That changes then how I view this request versus just a general blanket request. They're simply asking for a vehicle to provide that same assurance today that we're planning on providing later when we finish the contingency plan. So it seems reasonable to me. Small volume of waste, it's a small quantity of activity. It is subject to whatever we define for the condition, which I presume is the closure of WCS, and we can put some words, whatever makes us comfortable around that. This isn't a big thing for them to get away with, right? If they take advantage of this or abuse this export permit, you only get to do that once, and it's for less than a curie of waste. So I don't suspect that they're going to try to abuse it that way, but proof will be in the pudding, and we can react appropriately should they take advantage of it. The bottom line is the optics are bad, right? We can resolve the optics if we finish our contingency plan and address this concern within that contingency plan. But despite the optics, I think since we have not yet addressed it, it just seems reasonable that we would approve this with the understanding that that's the direction we're going in general with our contingency plan in the near future.
Any other commissioner comments? I'm going to recognize Steve, Nance, Dave Carlson, and Tony, who have all raised their hands. But before we do that, are there any other commissioner comments that need to be made before we move on?
I have one. That are we on the contingency plan or are we on export?
Well, it kind of covers both. That was kind of the point.
So you called it for both. So we're talking about both.
So we haven't specifically introduced the export authorization requests, but the discussion about contingency planning overlaps with those. And so I think we're having a general discussion now about them. We will then, at some point after everyone makes their comments, specifically take up the export authorization requests.
Because I'm kind of like Dick. I don't think they're in the same league, but that's my comment.
Okay, let me go to Steve Nance next. You raised your hand. I want to make sure you have the opportunity to speak. And I think you're currently on mute.
Can
You gotta love Zoom.
Steve, can you hear us?
can you turn the volume down? Can y'all hear me?
I think there's a pretty bad echo.
Yeah, that was. Yeah, let's go. All right. Yeah, that was from the phone. Can y'all hear me well now?
Yes. Yes.
Hello?
Steve?
All right. Can y'all hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I wanted to basically echo what Greg talked about with Comanche Peak as far as why STP needs or requests this permit as a contingency plan. And we are asking for 10,000 cubic feet. This coming year, you know, there's a multiple outage year, so we actually have a short window, a very short period of time that we could store waste on site. And it's a matter of a couple of months when we're in multiple outage years and all that. And, you know, I also want to echo what Commissioner Edwards said, which is very true, that we have no intention of using this permit for anything other than a contingency. And as you say, the proof is in the pudding. We have to report back to the commission what we ship where. So obviously, you know, we can be judged by that the next time we ask for an export permit. So of course, we're not going to abuse that. So I just wanted to point that out. So
we appreciate those comments. Any questions for Steve before we let him go? Thank you, Steve. Dave Carlson, you raised your hand as well. Do you have any additional comments?
Yes, Chairman. So Comanche Peak and SDP, both Greg and Steve spoke to me, and I'm completely supportive of their export permits. You know, they've assured me they have no plans to use them unless I was to shut down. I have no plans to shut down, so I don't think this will actually be any impact at all. But really the bigger issue is related to what Commissioner Edwards said. And as she said, utilities don't want to allow single point vulnerabilities. And so as we look at the contingency plan and perhaps stick something in there that, you know, if, as I'm assuring you is not going to happen, but if our facility shut down, that there would be the ability for others to export. I think perhaps even more important is to consider what we would do about imports if other facilities around the country shut down. Those, you know, for some facilities, I think perhaps the, you know, facility in South Carolina or the facility in Clive, Utah, would be a single point vulnerability for them. And so if we did have a situation there, how would this compact react in a timely manner in order to, you know, help to deal with the situation that would be presented there?
Any questions for Dave on this topic before we let him go? Thank you for those comments, Mr. Carlson. Those actually, I think, help us a lot. Tony raised his hand as well. Tony, I want to make sure we get your comments.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, if folks can hear me now.
Yes.
Okay. Once again, okay, just for the record, I'm Tony Lashinsky. I am with the Vermont Public Service Department, and I am Vermont's state nuclear engineer. Listening to this discussion of contingency plan, as it progressed, I began to realize that this sounded, well, number one, you guys are looking at a what-if scenario of really if disposal operations at the compact facility needed to be suspended for whatever reason, maybe not necessarily a facility closure, but say a suspension of operations, be it a regulatory issue either with the NRC or Texas Commission on Environmental Quality or whomever, or a physical problem. And as I realized that, yeah, I just want to remind folks that, several years ago, 2014, if I remember correctly, the waste isolation pilot plant did have a fire. They were shut down for well over a year, if I recall correctly. So I'm wondering that in looking at this contingency plan, was any experience from the waste isolation pilot project shutdown considered? And if I recall correctly, didn't the Compact Commission site temporarily pull WIP, waste that was intended for WIP? And so could something like that be done here as a contingency?
Well, I will let.
That waste never went into the compact waste facility. It was on WCS's property, which is 13,000 acres, if everybody remember that. But it wasn't ever in the CFW. It's in our business plan, but it's not in our business plan, that waste.
So it was stored but not disposed of at the compact waste facility. Is that correct?
We're working daily to get it back to the state of New Mexico.
Okay, so basically you still have some of the waste there. I thought it had shipped.
No, it's still there, right, Dave?
Okay. He's nodding his head in agreement. Okay.
Dave Carlson, is some of that WIP waste still in storage on your facility?
Right. None of it's stored in the compact waste facility or near the compact waste facility or any buildings associated with the compact waste facility. But some of the waste has been shipped to WIP at this point, and some of it can't be shipped to WIP yet. We are working aggressively hand in hand with the state of Texas to get the DOE to remove that waste.
And Tony, on the flip side of what you're talking about, we have inquired of the other facilities in our country about entering agreements in the event of a contingency with our facility here in Texas to take waste. The initial response to that is that would require legislative changes in their individual states, and they don't suspect that would ever happen. But we have made that inquiry. And I guess it's not a foregone conclusion, but based on initial responses, we do not expect that there's going to be kind of an intercompact agreement where we backstop one another. To Dave Carlson's point earlier, obviously because the facility in Andrews is actually open to out of compact waste, there would be the potential that if another one of the facilities closed down that don't accept out of compact waste, those compacts may be able to send their waste to Andrews, because it would otherwise be like any other non-compact generator sending their waste. And I guess there could always be the potential in the future for agreements to kind of support that concept, but it doesn't look like it would be a two-way street by any means. So, so before we move on to actually considering the export petitions, I want to make sure everybody has had the opportunity to comment in any way they wanted to. Is there any other comments that anyone, whether it be on the commission or in the public, would like to make at this point?
Mr. Chairman, this is Dick Adams. Can I make a couple of brief concluding remarks?
Absolutely. Thank you, Dick.
I've practiced before this commission since its inception, and I can promise each of you that Comanche Peak is not trying to pull a fast one. We're not trying to get away with anything. We haven't exported any waste at all this year. Not a single cubic foot. We're asking for a contingent permit in the event of unforeseen circumstances, and we would prefer not to have specific defined conditions applied to that permit, because we can't predict the future as to what may happen. Maybe people smarter than me can predict the future, but it seems like every time I try, I'm wrong. So, yeah, as Commissioner Edwards mentioned, you know, if we abuse this export permit, we fully expect to have a tough time coming back whenever we want to ask for another one. Thank you.
Thanks. And I would remind everyone again that there is a reporting requirement associated with these export authorizations. So we will hear back about how they were used or if they were used and exactly when waste was shipped. So to the extent we ever need to go back and do effectively a desk audit, make sure we understand what is being used, we can do that. Anyone else like to comment before we move on to consideration? Okay, then I think we will circle back now and go back to item 7, and it is the consideration of requested export authorizations. The first one being the export request from Comanche Peak, which is tab 21 on your in your electronic notebooks. John, I always forget. Do you present these, or would you like me to do it?
I'm happy to present them.
Okay, thank you.
The technical committee has received and reviewed an export application from Comanche Peak Power Company, LLC. In this case, Comanche Peak's requesting to be able to export waste from September 1, 2020 through August 31, 2021. They've requested up to 5,000 cubic feet, 1 curie total radioactivity, and the waste would all be Class A. The material would be going to the Energy Solutions Bear Creek facility in Oak Ridge with disposal of any material eventually at the Clive, Utah facility. The waste description is Class A, low dose rate, dry active waste. Their justification does specifically say that this is only for contingency, that it's not, they don't expect to export the waste, only this prevents that single point failure that we've discussed. The technical committee recommends approval. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any further discussion or questions of the technical committee about the export authorization request from Comanche Peak?
This would be contingent upon their our facility not being available, and would be subject to reporting back to the commission should it be exercised.
Yeah, that contingency language is specifically in the justification that they've provided.
Any other questions of the technical committee? All right, we can move on to a motion then.
I make a motion that we approve the export request from Comanche Peak Power Company, LLC. The period is September 1, 2020 through August 31, 2021. Volume is 5,000 cubic feet. The total radioactivity is 1 curie. It's Class A. The material would go to Energy Solutions facility in Oak Ridge. It's Class A, low dose rate, dry active waste. I think that's it.
There's a motion. Is there a second? There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Any public comment on item 7A? Hearing none, I think we can move on to a vote. All in favor of the motion to approve the export authorization request of Comanche Peak, represented in item 7A on our agenda, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no.
No.
Please register 1 no vote, but the ayes still prevail and the motion passes. We can now move on to item 7B, which is the export authorization of South Texas, which is tab 22 in your notebook. And I will turn it back over to the Vice Chairman.
The technical committee has received and reviewed an export export request from STP Nuclear Operating Company. In this case, it would be for September 1, 2020 through August 31, 2021. They've requested 10,000 cubic feet. 0.75 curies. It's Class A material. The material would be, again, going to the Energy Solutions Bear Creek facility in Tennessee with ultimate disposal at Clive, Utah. The waste description is low-level Class A bulk dry active waste. And similarly to the Comanche Peak, they are requesting this only as a contingency, as we have discussed. And with that, the technical committee recommends approval, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions of the technical committee on the export authorization request of STP? Hearing none, we'll move on to a motion.
Make a motion to approve the export request for STP Nuclear Operating Company. It's for Class A material, 0.75 curies total radioactivity, 10,000 cubic feet total volume. Would be exported to the Energy Solutions Bear Creek facility. The waste description is low-level Class A bulk dry active waste.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion about the export authorization request of STP? Any public comment on the export authorization request of STP? Hearing none, we'll move on to a vote. All in favor of the motion to approve the export authorization request of STP, please indicate so by saying aye.
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 All opposed, no.
No.
Please register one no vote, but the aye votes still prevail, and the export authorization request of STP is approved. That concludes item 7. So now we will go back to where we left off, which is item 12 in our agenda, which is a discussion concerning the charge and focus of our capacity committee. And I did not talk to Commissioner Edwards beforehand, so I do not want to ambush her on this, but I just wanted to make sure we had a discussion at this point about what we as a commission hoped that capacity committee would be looking at and doing. I think the reason this committee was something that is important in my mind is because obviously preserving capacity for our in-compact generators is one of our main missions. And I also know that for us non-technical people, the discussion of capacity can sometimes be confusing, and there's different terms used, and there might even be different measures used related to as disposed of and as decayed. And so I wanted to open up the floor to take everybody's comments that Commissioner Edwards could take and help kind of help forming the mission for the committee that we have established with her as the chair. So let me open it up, and Lisa, if you have any comments, by all means, please throw them out there, but anybody else who has thoughts on it, please speak up as well.
I've done a little bit of the legwork talking with Linda to sort of start a straw man on this. Once I actually took a little time to think it through without procrastinating, it sort of seemed rather straightforward to me once I started trying to put pencil to paper. What Lynn and I discussed was a series of definitions. One is related to license capacity, which is just whether it's built or not built, what the total license capacity, both in terms of volume and activity is. So that's sort of a one-time definition until the license is actually revised by TCEQ. The next one is actual built capacity. And the built capacity, again, would be for both volume and for curies. And it should, in my mind, be updated probably annually. Not every single meeting is necessary, but annually so that it can reflect decay correction in the curie limit. So as built, there's some limit on the volume and the curies, and us having as a commission and the public having access and transparency what that at-built capacity is, and of the as-built capacity, what has been used and what's available would be designated. The third area that I think would be of interest to this commission is a definition of the needed volume for planned decommissioning activities. So in this case, the onus would likely fall upon the major generators, Vermont Yankee, Comanche Peak, and South Texas Project, to provide the commission a estimate of their decommissioning volumes. In Vermont Yankee's case, they would have to sort of provide two numbers related to that estimate, what's been used and what is still needed. While this is an ask for the facilities to provide this data is provided every 5 years as part of a decommissioning cost estimate to the NRC. It's a required document, part of public records. So I don't think it would be particularly onerous on the sites to provide those numbers. As long as the site hasn't entered decommissioning space, my recommendation to the committee would be to have those numbers updated once every 5 years, consistent when they update their decommissioning cost estimates to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. In the case of VY, where they are actively using the planned disposal volume, I think in the decommissioning phase, it's reasonable to want those estimates updated annually. Those are sort of my initial thoughts. I did consult with not only Linda, but gave Dave Carlson a call and sort of verbally went through these numbers to see if there's something objectionable or if he had insight to offer to this process. Did the same with Bob Knapp at Comanche Peak, and just try to get an initial gut level reaction. I have received some comments from both of them, and I'm looking at how to incorporate that. But I'm very interested in what the rest of the commission or even members of the public are interested in hearing in terms of us having defined volumes. I think creating a chart that says, here's the license capacity of which this is what's used and what's available. And then there's a second bar that's smaller that says, this is what's built. And of what's built, this is what's used and what's available. And then a third sort of series of bars, one for each of our major generators, the nuclear power plants, that say this is the volume that I need for decommissioning, and have the ability to compare that volume to both the total license capacity and to the as-built capacity. Those are, I think, the things that are of interest.
Thank you. That may seem simple to you, but it seems incredibly smart to me. So that all of what you said makes perfect sense, but I will open it up to everyone else to see if they have any comments or suggestions as well.
Lisa, since Vermont Yankees in progress right now, could we as a rough yardstick take what volume they're estimating and just say the amount will be essentially about the same for the Texas plants, and then create a reserve space of that amount as just a rough yardstick to start this exercise?
Well, I think that the plants are in a position to actually provide the numbers. It's very interesting, Commissioner Monday, because different reactor types have shown some differences in the decommissioning waste volumes. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think VY is a boiling water reactor, whereas the Texas reactors are pressurized water reactors. And that implies the potential to have some differences based upon the different reactor types. In addition, folks have to go in and estimate these volumes because they're a significant component to ensuring that the utility has set aside the right amount of money to cover the total cost of decommissioning, which is a statutory obligation on their part. So we might as well use the numbers that they've already provided and are using to determine what they need to put in their decommissioning estimate.
Is the capacity number we see on our reports monthly, is that only in the currently built cell, or is there a way to forecast out in the future for these two plants decommissioning, building out all cells? How would that work?
So I think once we have these definitions, we can create charts or ask for charts to be created that clearly sort of gives us a view, total license, total built, total needed for decommissioning activities of our compact facilities. And, you know, we can stack them or even make a series of things so that we can see that clearly and compare it to whichever numbers of interest to us, or perhaps both numbers. I think it will lead to another interesting discussion, which is when you look at decommissioning waste volumes, the vast majority of it is expected to be what we call low activity waste or very low level waste, right? That's going to be suitable for a RCRA disposal facility. There's a long history in the United States of prior plants that have been decommissioned, utilizing it and shipping that waste for alternate disposal. We, you know, presume the RCRA cell at WCS will be used as that alternate disposal, just like 80% of the waste. And I say that just based upon some of the records that I've seen, what it is for any particular plant, including the ones in our compact, they have the obligation to, you know, sort of determine that according to the rules. But then of the remaining waste that is not suitable for alternate disposal, only part of it is class B and C waste. There is part of it that's greater than what's suitable for alternate disposal, but it doesn't necessarily require a BC compact facility. It could go into just for class A. And that can affect decommissioning estimates. And I think that is something that's reasonable for the Compact Commission to consider, is really what kind of reserve volume for decommissioning activities for our compact members is most important to preserve. So WCS has come on record saying that when they get close enough to the needed reserve capacity for these big activities by compact members, they would pursue building out additional capacity, so that there's always sort of a sense of comfort by our major compact generators that there's going to be enough room for the waste that they generate at the end of the life of the plant, which is a pretty significant volume. But to me, that seems reasonable, something for the commission to debate. But the number that we're interested in is not the total volume for decommissioning. It's the volume of class B and C waste. And driving at that number and comparing it to the as-built capacity, I think is, it would be my recommendation for the commission to consider closely.
You know, Peter had a fascinating, I guess it was a PowerPoint he had from some source about Vermont Yankee and how it was being broken down. Peter, you may want to circulate that to everybody. It was really interesting. And I will say some of it surprised me that it was classified as A. I wouldn't have guessed some of these internal parts to be A, honestly.
But the common percentage, and it varies a little bit, I've always heard is, you know, 85 to 90% of the volume of these decommissionings will go to RCRA facilities, where 85 to 90% of the Curie content will go to a facility like the compact waste facility.
It's a definitional question. Like I said, it kind of surprised me. A few of the things on his PowerPoint that were classified as A's, I would not have expected it. Big pieces of equipment, you know, just large volume size.
Actually, I think there are actually two different things involved. There is, I can circulate the Vermont Yankee PowerPoints, but the thing that had us all a bit perplexed was the San Onofre pressure vessel that was headed to Clive, Utah, and we were not so sure how a pressure vessel could be Class A, but we also realized there was a lot we didn't know about it, including whether they had cut parts out of it. And,
that PowerPoint you found was really helpful, I thought, or interesting.
Yeah, that's it. It's easy to circulate.
There have been, I don't know about the songs experience, but there have been examples in the industry where they concrete filled the reactor vessel. They took the pressure vessel, they filled it with concrete and got permission to classified the entire component, where they took the activity that was in the component and were able to average it over the entire volume because they had filled it with cement. And that saved dose for the workers because they didn't have to expose workers, real live people, to cutting up pieces and parts. And, you know, that was part of the justification behind it. But people look at those carefully to balance the dose to actual people, to the allowed practices, and balance the economic impacts of what classification the waste results in, depending upon the activities that they apply.
Well, that exceeds all my expectations for what we were hoping to accomplish with this one line item, because it sounds like you've thought through it all, which is, and everything you said makes perfect sense to me. And I wanted to make sure everybody else had the opportunity to chime in on it. But it sounds as though you are accomplishing exactly what I had hoped at least we could get, which is something that both technical and non-technical people can look at and have a kind of an easy to read guide that answers some of these questions about capacity, and what you described is exactly that. So thank you very much. So any other comments before we move on? I'm sorry, Tony has his hand up again. Let me, go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, I just wanted to add two things just as an FYI. And I noted the comments of, you know, a little bit of surprise that much of what's gone out from Vermont Yankee thus far has been Class A waste. Realize that one of the major activities has been really dismantling the turbine that was at the plant, and so that was not a highly contaminated major component. The reactor vessel segmentation, though, which has been ongoing since middle of 2019 or so, they're just now getting to the components that will really be Class B and Class C waste. So there is certainly waste in that area coming. But thus far, they have to dig into where the higher level, low level waste is. And also, just to comment on San Onofre, realize that this is what was being shipped was the San Onofre Unit 1 reactor vessel. And just a little bit of history on that. San Onofre Unit 1 shut down in the mid-1990s. I forget the exact date. The decommissioning began in earnest roughly around the year 2000 or 2001 or so. And Unit 1 was more or less fully disassembled by 2005. And the last component that they needed to move was the reactor vessel. And they could not get permission to transport it off for a variety of reasons. So basically, that reactor vessel has been unused for going on 20 years. It's certainly been sitting dormant on site for 15 years. So that probably accounts for its low dosage at this point, is that a lot of the radiation has just decayed away.
Thank you, Tony. That's informative.
I'm happy, Chairman Hurley, to try to work with Linda and do a little more outreach, and then put something together that you can add to the agenda.
That would be great. That'd be great.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions about our capacity committee before we move on? Okay, that concludes item 12. Item 13 is our future meetings, which usually is pretty boring, but takes on a different tact in the times in which we're living. This is tab 26 in your notebook. We have a meeting scheduled for August 27th. We will likely need to have that meeting because we have received several applications. It may not be a very long meeting, but I think we need to have it. As it currently stands, I would presume that we will have that meeting via remote means, but we will continue to monitor that. If for some reason we are going to meet in person, it would be in Austin. We have subsequent meetings tentatively scheduled for October 15th of 2020 and December 10th. Again, as we always say, we never meet just to meet. If we have no reason or no business before us, we'll cancel those meetings. Again, I don't know what the future is going to hold on this. We probably need to stay nimble and be able to meet virtually if we need to, but otherwise, those meetings would be in Austin. What this clearly indicates is that we are not going to go to Vermont in the fall. My thinking on that is that in light of the uncertainty that's going on right now, I would not want to plan a meeting and do all the work that it takes to plan a meeting like that and then simply have to cancel it. Obviously, my first concern about any meeting is the safety of everybody involved, commissioners and attendees and anyone else that has to make the travel. So I don't want to plan that Vermont meeting in light of what we know now, just because it would seem to be that the odds are that it would not be a good idea to ask 20 or more people to get on a plane and travel to Vermont. That's not to say that we won't go to Vermont in the new year, and we will continue to discuss that. At this date, though, because of the time it takes to plan it, we probably are for sure not going to Vermont this fall. In the October timeframe is also scheduled the low-level forum meeting in San Antonio. I do not know what its status is. I don't know if it will happen. If we believe it will happen and we feel comfortable meeting, there is a chance that we would move our October meeting to coincide with a low-level forum meeting and have a meeting in San Antonio. Again, the logistics would have to get squared away pretty quickly. And so we will look to the low-level forum to let us know if we think that there is a chance that we're going to be able to have that low-level forum meeting in San Antonio. But for the time being, we will leave it as October 15th in Austin, and with the potential to meet virtually the way we're doing today. Then the last meeting of the year will be December 10th. Oftentimes we cancel that meeting because there's not a lot of activity around the holidays. We will play that by ear as well, knowing the uncertainties that we all have going on right now. Starting in January of 2021, obviously our legislature is back in session in Austin. So those meetings, once we start scheduling them in 21, if we have them in Austin, we will likely have them somewhere other than the Capitol, but we'll also look to potentially have those meetings, if they are in person, in other physical locations, kind of like we did with Waco, and we've done it in DFW in the past, just to take our show on the road and to also avoid any complications with the legislature being in town. So any questions about future meetings or how we're going to have them?
We'll miss you.
We appreciate that. And if we all show up on your doorstep, Peter, for some other reason, we expect you to take us in. I noticed that Dick got off the call before this happened, so he obviously wanted to avoid the topic of us coming to see. I appreciate everyone's patience today. Obviously, this format, again, is a little different than what we're used to. I want to thank Andrew again for all the work of doing this. He makes it incredibly easy, where otherwise I'm sure it would be incredibly difficult. So we appreciate his assistance, and we appreciate everybody's being willing to participate this way. And with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
I will take that as a motion in a second. All in favor indicate so by saying aye.
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 Thank you very much. We are adjourned. I appreciate everyone.
Are we doing an executive session or anything, Brandon?
No, we do not need to now. Thank you all very much. Y'all have a good day.